Chapter 495. Yes. After an unknown period of time, perfected Lord Tianlan opened his mouth. His tone sounded extremely calm and gentle, as if he was talking about a trivial matter. You're the first orphan that I've taken in and nurtured. Over the years, I've nurtured a few more people. My method of nurturing them is similar to yours. Lu Chen took a deep breath and looked at perfected Lord Tianlan. I've never heard you mention these things before, including the people in Fuyunji, Old Ma and Shuiying. You didn't mention them either. They don't know either, perfected Lord Tianlan said indifferently. Lu Chen was rather surprised. Why? Perfected Lord Tianlan raised his head and looked at the distant sky outside the hall. They're all dead. What's there to mention? Other than me, no one else knows about this. You're the second person to know about this. They're all dead? Lu Chen was stunned. Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded. His expression was rather indifferent as he said, life and death are just a thin line for those who work as shadows. There's only 1 in 10,000 people who can be as outstanding as you. Be it in terms of cultivation talent or temperament, you have to be the best and most unyielding. Otherwise, you'll either not be able to overcome the difficulties that you have to endure in cultivation, or you'll die a violent death due to carelessness in hiding. There are too many such cases. At the end of his sentence, his expression finally revealed a hint of regret as he shook his head slightly. The corners of Lu Chen's eyes twitched slightly. He seemed to still be in disbelief. Other than me, everyone else is dead? They're all dead. Lu Chen fell silent. After a while, he said, Do you still remember their names? I don't remember. Dead people don't need names. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at this disciple of his calmly. You're not a newbie. After being a shadow for so long, you should understand these things. Even if it was you, if you had unfortunately exposed yourself and died in the evil sect, today, no one would mention you again. Lu Chen was silent. After a while, he said in a low voice, I understand. It's just that when I occasionally think about these things, I still feel that it's a little unfair. Perfected Lord Tianlan turned around and walked into the depths of the hall. At the same time, his voice rang out. How can there be so much true fairness in this world? You've seen those who were born with good lives, but you've also seen those who had worse luck than you. They were all orphans, but how many of them died on the streets back then? So don't think too much. Now that you've made a name for yourself, just enjoy your life. Don't think about those unhappy things in the past. As the voice gradually weakened, perfected Lord Tianlan's tall figure walked into the shadows in the depths of the hall, seemingly about to become one with the darkness. Lu Chen looked at his back and suddenly shouted, What about that matter? What should we do next? Perfected Lord Tianlan's figure disappeared. Only his voice floated over. Just do as you think. Lu Chen responded indifferently. Lu Chen's act of forcibly taking away a wanted criminal from Fuyunji's prison had attracted a lot of criticism, and it had also caused undercurrents to surge in Xianxia. However, these disturbances and dissatisfactions, both overt and covert, ceased after people found out that Lu Chen had actually thrown the criminal into the Kunlun Palace Hall. It was not an exaggeration to say that perfected Lord Tianlan was the most famous perfected lord of the divine transformation realm in Xianxia. Why would people offend such a great god? In short, if there was any dissatisfaction in their hearts, they would hide it secretly. This matter would wait and see. Who told him to have a good master? Correspondingly, Lu Chen soon decided not to live in the house at the foot of the mountain at Shima Bridge, and directly moved into the Kunlun Palace Hall. His decisiveness was simply a case of sailing with the wind. He did not care about the issue of face at all. Even Old Ma was amazed by his decisiveness. As for the black dog at the foot of the mountain, Old Ma might have found a large cart to transport it over. Anyway, in the Kunlun Palace Hall, perfected Lord Tianlan and his disciple were the most powerful. Even if perfected Tiehu personally issued the no-dog order, it could not control this place. The Kunlun Palace Hall was naturally much larger than the house at the foot of the mountain. Atsu seemed very satisfied with this place. It was very excited to come here and strolled around. After Lu Chen warned it not to leave the scope of the Kunlun Palace Hall, he took Old Ma to the place where Chen He was imprisoned. Where is White Lotus? Old Ma, who was walking on the road, asked Lu Chen, "Is she still living with Su Qingjun?" "Yes, she is staying there and not leaving. She probably found that although Su Qingjun is cold, she is actually more reliable than the two of us." "What are you talking about? I am different from you." Old Ma complained, then said, "Now there's a lot of talk outside, guessing what Chen He said to you. What are you going to do next?" "Wait to catch him." They arrived at the quiet room in front. Lu Chen walked over with Old Ma, pushed the door open, and walked in. At first glance, Old Ma saw Chen He, who was lying on the ground, tied up like a dumpling and unable to move at all. He was staring at Lu Chen with an angry and vicious gaze. But even his mouth was stuffed with something, so he could not make a sound. Lu Chen walked over, and Old Ma hurriedly closed the door of the quiet room behind him. Then he frowned and looked at Chen He and said with some doubt, "Didn't he agree to cooperate with you? Why do you still look like you have a blood feud?" Lu Chen squatted down in front of Chen He, looked at him with a smile, and said, "Probably, except for you, everyone in the world knows that you have turned to me and my master, Lord Tianlong." After a pause, he deliberately added, "Of course, this also includes your devil cult companions." Chen He's body twisted and wriggled, looking like he was about to go mad with anger. Old Ma saw this and was suddenly shocked and said, "I say, could it be you? I was talking nonsense to the outside." Lu Chen admitted what he had done in an unusually straightforward manner and said, "Otherwise, why would I be in such a hurry to move him from the prison to here? But Chen He, don't blame me, I am actually saving your life. Otherwise, now that the outside world is talking about you betraying your master for glory, who knows when you will suddenly die in that prison." Old Ma looked at him with some disbelief. Fuyunji prison had been famous for many years, but such a thing had never happened before. Lu Chen pretended not to see, and seemed to have no intention of interrogating Chen He. He only said indifferently, "How is it, have you thought it through? You are also a smart person. The current situation is that I have splashed dirty water on you, and I will continue to do so in the future, more and more, until your whole body is dirty and wet, and no one in the devil cult will believe you anymore. You can't go back." Lu Chen said to him, "We have all stayed in the devil cult for more than 10 years, and know how those people treat traitors, and with this matter, even if you have a whole body full of mouths, you can't clear your name. No matter what, the people in the devil cult will not open their hearts to a suspected traitor, right? You see, you have no way out." Chen He made a weak but shrill hissing sound. His eyes were red, as if he was about to go crazy. Lu Chen did not care about this and said calmly, "You see, compared to other people who only know how to use brute force to interrogate, I am the one who truly knows what is the most important in the heart of a believer of the Saint cult. Those people that you are not afraid of death to protect actually hate you to the core and want to grind your bones and scatter your ashes if you still have a family. And do you?" Lu Chen looked down at him and said calmly, "If you do, what will happen to them, we all know in our hearts, right?" He reached over and gently removed the cloth from Chen He's mouth. Chen He stared at Lu Chen, and after a while, he hissed in a low voice, "Shameless." Lu Chen raised his eyebrows, squinted his eyes, looked at him for a while, and said, "So, you really do have a family." Chapter 496. Although they had been captured and beaten by the world's righteous sects led by Xianxia for hundreds of years, accused of being evil and propagandized for many years, in the hearts of the people, they were extremely vicious and even evil like ghosts. But the people of the evil sect were after all still human. Of course they would have family and relatives. This logic couldn't be more simple. If only those who had no father or mother, lonely and destitute, could enter the evil sect, then this sect would have been completely annihilated hundreds of years ago. Back then, when Lu Chen was lurking in the devil cult as a shadow, among the core figures of the devil cult around him, there were many family and friends. For example, Master Elder Yun, who was closest to him, had a son and a daughter, and they had a very good relationship with Lu Chen. The elder brother, Yun Jian, was a good friend of Lu Chen, and the younger sister, Yun Shaoqing, grew up with Lu Chen. They had developed feelings for each other, and in the future, Elder Yun had even thought of matchmaking them. Unfortunately, in the far-reaching battle of the Barren Valley, not only did the world's righteous and demonic sects completely change, But even the fate of the insignificant individuals, everyone, came to an abrupt end on that night, and then embarked on a different path. When Lu Chen woke up from the pain of being burned by the black fire, Yun Jian and Yun Shaoqing had already died in that battle. In the chaos, even their corpses could not be found, and from then on, everyone was separated from each other. "Hey!" A voice suddenly sounded in his ear, and at the same time, someone pushed his shoulder. Lu Chen was shocked and turned to look only to see old Ma frowning at him, a puzzled look on his face, and asked, "What's wrong with you?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then shook his head and said, "Nothing." Throwing the past memories from his mind, Lu Chen took a deep breath. The past was over, there was no medicine for regret in this world. "Do you know why I brought you here from the dungeon?" Lu Chen looked at Chen He and said, "That prison was full of people from the devil cult. If I didn't take precautions, I was really afraid that you would die inexplicably at any time." Chen He stared at him angrily, but had no intention of refuting his words. Lu Chen said calmly, "We are all smart people, it's better to lay things out. Your performance in the devil cult is much better than the real fanatics I saw back then. You shouldn't be someone who is willing to give up everything for those illusory gods. Then what's left is nothing more than seeking fame and fortune, as well as the well-being of your family." Lu Chen smiled, looked at him, and said, "But you have nothing now. You're locked up here and tortured day and night. You can't even beg for death. What benefits do you have?" So, it was for the sake of a loyal reputation that would be immortalized for generations to come. But look, it's all gone now. The reputation that you valued has been smeared by me. Also, how do the people in the devil cult treat traitors? Let me think about it. I'll definitely be hunted to death. You see, I hid for more than 10 years back then. In addition, if you have a family, of course, you will vent your anger. You are an old man, don't tell me you don't know these things? Chen He's face slowly contorted. He clenched his teeth and stared at Lu Chen with his eyes wide open. A thin trail of blood slowly flowed from the corner of his mouth, as if he had bitten through his lips. Old Ma frowned at the side. He seemed to be a little uncomfortable with Lu Chen's tone of voice. However, Lu Chen did not seem to have any intention of letting Chen He off. As if he was talking about something that could not be more normal, he said, "If I remember correctly, in the devil cult, when dealing with the family members of traitors, the higher the position, the more ruthless they are. Even the elderly and children are not spared. Exterminating the whole family is also common. If there are some lunatics among those who go, then those family members will suffer even more, especially some women and children." He gently exhaled, looked at Chen He and said, "You know, I am not threatening you, I am speaking the truth." Chen He was silent, the muscles on his face contorted. After a while, he suddenly said in a hoarse voice, "Your actions, what's the difference between you and the evil people of the devil cult? No, you're even more vicious than us." Lu Chen raised his head, his expression a little strange. But after a while, he was heard saying, "I'm different from you." But what exactly was different he did not say. "Rely on me." Lu Chen said to Chen He, "You are now at the end of the road, there's no way out. Even if you'd rather die than submit, after you die, you won't get the reputation you want, instead, you'll harm your friends and family. Why bother? Look at me, I have the most powerful Xianxia in the world, the most powerful demigod, and I'm his only disciple. If you rely on me, you'll be able to walk under the sun, all kinds of benefits, reputation, resources, you'll have it all. Everything that the devil cult can't give you, I'll give it to you easily. Not to mention, you can also save your friends and family from disaster." Lu Chen's tone from the beginning to the end was gentle and calm, his words patient and pleasant to listen to. It looked like he always convinced people with reason. But for some reason, the other two people in the room, when they looked at Lu Chen, felt a faint chill in their hearts. It gave people the feeling that they were looking at a gentle but terrifying devil, slowly dragging people into hell with a smile. "How is it?" Lu Chen said to Chen He, "I've placed all the results of this matter in front of you. If you still don't wake up, then you can go to hell." Chen He's expression changed, he gritted his teeth, and after a while, he shouted hoarsely, "Why should I believe you?" Old Ma, who was standing at the side, sighed in his heart and looked away. He knew that this tough man, who had once withstood torture, could not hold on at this moment. Lu Chen smiled, then reached out to untie the rope on Qinhe's body, at the same time said gently, "It's okay, you can discuss these things with me, just tell me what I need to do to make you believe me." When Lu Chen and old Ma came out of the room and walked to the door of the Kunlun Hall, they found that it was almost dark. They had actually stayed there for a whole day. Looking at the beautiful sunset in the distance, Lu Chen was in a daze, while old Ma sighed and said, "Congratulations." Lu Chen said lightly, "What's there to congratulate? It's just to rope in a person who has no way to go." Old Ma smiled, thinking that if this matter was really so simple, there were not many people in the world who could do it. Lu Chen suddenly called him. "What's wrong?" Old Ma said. Lu Chen said, "After a long time, I sometimes feel a little scared. Some people and things in the past, I thought I could remember them forever, but now, in a flash of 10 years, I find that I seem to have begun to forget." Old Ma's heart moved and he said, "What have you forgotten? Who and what things?" Lu Chen shook his head, his face a little blank. After a moment, he said, "You go back first, I'll wait here for my master to come back, it's time to discuss the last thing with him." Chapter 497. In the dark and humid night, a cold wind blew past. Unbeknownst to him, it started to rain again. The rain hit the eaves and flowed down, gradually forming a transparent wall of water hanging on the eaves. The water droplets floated down in the dark and dripped on the ground, making a low and sweet sound. "Sister Sue." In the originally dark and quiet room, there was suddenly a call. With some caution, it floated over from the bed. It was White Lotus's voice. On another bed not far from the other side of the room, Su Qingjun turned over and responded. Then, she seemed a little surprised and said, "This is the first time you called me that, right? Is it?" White Lotus thought for a moment and seemed a little embarrassed. "We weren't familiar before, but now that you saved my life and are older than me, I still have to call you sister." Su Qingjun smiled in the dark and said, "Although I helped to treat your wounds, the person who really saved you was actually Lu Chen. I can't take this credit." White Lotus snorted and said, "He stabbed me first. If I still have to be grateful to him, then I can't do it." Su Qingjun smiled and said, "That makes sense." After a pause, Su Qingjun looked at where White Lotus was and said, "White Lotus, when I heard you talking to Lu Chen a few days ago, I had a question that had been puzzling me. You didn't seem to be controlled by him at that time. Why didn't you dodge at that critical moment? If the injury had been more serious, you would have lost your life." White Lotus suddenly became silent. After a while, she said in a low voice, "I wasn't controlled by him, but I was still controlled by others." Her words were very vague and soft towards the end. Su Qingjun didn't hear it clearly and asked in surprise, "What?" White Lotus didn't seem to want to talk about this topic anymore. She turned to look at the window not far away and looked at the shadows swaying in the darkness. She heard the pleasant sound of rain outside. She seemed to be startled and then said faintly, "It's raining again." Su Qingjun looked at her and heard White Lotus's voice floating over like the wind outside. She said, "I wonder if it's raining on Kunlun Mountain now?" Su Qingjun was startled and then slowly sat up. She said softly, "What's wrong? Do you miss home?" White Lotus shook her head in the darkness and said sadly, "I don't miss home. I just miss the things on Kunlun Mountain. Sister Su, you've been out for so long. Do you miss home?" Su Qingjun was silent. After a while, she said, "Of course I still miss home. After all, my parents are still there, but I heard that they seem to have some resentment towards you?" White Lotus said, "When I was still on Kunlun Mountain, I had already heard such rumors." Su Qingjun was lost in thought. Then she smiled bitterly and said, "They are my parents. I didn't completely live up to their expectations. But that place is still my home." "You're so good. No matter what, you still have a home that you miss, unlike me." White Lotus suddenly sneered. After a pause, she said, "My master who died probably practiced that kind of ice and snow martial technique. He practiced it too deeply, and as a result, his temperament became as cold as ice. So I don't feel that he was passionate towards me. But like what you said, we were still master and disciple. Although he died inexplicably, he also caused me a lot of trouble. Su Qingjun was shocked and said, "Are you saying that Hakushin Jinkun, he harmed you?" "I was a person who hid under a big tree. I planned to enjoy the shade, but suddenly the tree fell. Of course I was embarrassed." White Lotus said snappily, "On the contrary, look at Lu Chen. He's so glorious now. Not to mention me, even you, compared to when we were in Kunlun Mountain, it's like heaven and earth." Although she knew that this kind of thing wasn't a happy thing, but when Su Qingjun heard White Lotus's words for the first time, she couldn't help but laugh in her heart. After a while, she stood up and walked to White Lotus's bedside and sat down. White Lotus turned her head to look at her in the darkness. Even in the darkness, Su Qingjun seemed to be able to see the girl's unusually bright eyes. "Don't hate Lu Chen too much in your heart," Su Qingjun said softly. "But?" White Lotus asked. Su Qingjun sighed and said, "In the past so many years, he has been a dangerous shadow who licks blood from the tip of a knife. I don't know how many lives he has taken. In other words, I don't know how high his cultivation is now, but his means of killing are definitely not bad." She turned her head and stared into White Lotus's eyes, saying in a low voice, "Think about it. If he really wanted to kill you that night, would that knife have missed?" White Lotus was silent. After a while, she suddenly turned over and faced the wall, looking like she was about to fall asleep. In front of the main hall of Kunlun, Perfected Lord Tianlan had already dismissed the guards who guarded the Kunlun Hall. Then he and Lu Chen, master and disciple, sat on the ground at the entrance of the main hall casually, with their backs against the tall doors behind them. Facing the rain that kept dripping from the eaves, they chatted and drank casually, as if this was a casual and carefree life. Except for the sound of the wind and rain, there was no other sound. It seemed that only the two of them were left in such a huge hall. Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at the boundless dark sky in the distance and did not speak for a long time. That was until Lu Chen's voice rang in his ears as though he wanted to confirm it with him. "So, it's decided then?" Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded and said, "Let's do it." Lu Chen also looked at the dark night outside. After a while, he suddenly said, "You know, I once called you a lunatic in front of old Ma." Perfected Lord Tianlan was stunned, as if he did not expect Lu Chen to suddenly say such a thing. At that moment, he only smiled and did not say anything, obviously not taking Lu Chen's words to heart. However, there was no smile on Lu Chen's face. It seemed that he was not just bickering with Perfected Lord Tianlan. He said in a low voice, "Back then, I scolded you to vent my anger. In fact, I didn't really mean that. However, is what you want to do now really okay?" Perfected Lord Tianlan said calmly, "It's okay. If you believe me, help me. If you don't believe me, you can also leave the immortal city. No one will stop you." After a moment of silence, Lu Chen said, "Actually, I'm also a lunatic. To think that I chose to believe you." Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed out loud and threw a wine gourd over. Lu Chen caught it and raised his head to take a big gulp. Then, he let out a long breath and sighed. "Awesome." As he said that, he turned to Perfected Lord Tianlan and asked in a deep voice, "How much time do we have?" Perfected Lord Tianlan hesitated for a moment and said, "I can't be sure. It depends on the situation of the blood moon." Lu Chen nodded as if expressing his understanding. Then, he turned around and looked at the water droplets that were dripping down from the top of the hall like a waterfall. After a while, he suddenly said to Perfected Lord Tianlan, "Speaking of which, I've been feeling a little puzzled about something recently." "What is it?" Lu Chen said, "It's about you, Master. For so many years, you've always treated the fiend cult as your #1 target. You've been involved in so many battles and killings, wanting to get rid of them as soon as possible. However, the strange thing is that you don't seem to care about it even though I've brought news that we might be able to capture Elder Gue this time. Isn't that a very strange thing?" Lu Chen turned around and stared at Perfected Lord Tianlan, saying softly, "Isn't that so, Master?" Chapter 498. There's nothing to be concerned about. He's just a stray dog who's old and feeble. Apart from barking a few times, He can't do much in the current situation. Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression did not change as he said indifferently, if we can catch him, we'll eliminate him. If we can't, he won't be able to do much anyway. Why should we care about him? Lu Chen did not say anything else. He just turned his head silently and looked at the boundless night outside. Then he raised his head and drank. Although Perfected Lord Tianlan's words to Lu Chen were very calm and relaxed, he was the boss. He could say whatever he wanted. If his subordinates also had the same attitude, then there must be something wrong with their brains. Of course, Lu Chen's brain was not damaged. Therefore, he very wisely pretended that he had not heard Perfected Lord Tianlan's words. He did not neglect any of the arrangements and preparations that should be made. He had been forced into a dead end. In the end, he still lowered his head in the face of reality. He was originally a person who was not even afraid of death. In the end, he found that he could not bear to die with a stain on his name. Not to mention that his family might even be tortured and killed by his fellows from the devil cult whom he had risked his life to protect. Since that was the case, what was the point of persevering and dying? Therefore, it was better to change his way of living. At this point in life, there was no turning back. There was only one path in front of him. Just thinking about it made him feel a little sad. Since there was such a gap in his mind, the remaining desires quickly broke through all his defenses like floodwaters. His past perseverance seemed to be worthless at this moment. However, before he completely defected, He only had one last insistence and request for Lu Chen. He wanted to see his family. Lu Chen agreed. Of course, this matter could not be separated from the all-powerful Fuyunji. Lu Chen directly found Xueying. These two were now the most powerful nobles under perfected Lord Tianlan. Regardless of whether their previous relationship was a little delicate, after Lu Chen explained the situation to her, Xueying immediately agreed and began to act without hesitation. Chen He's family was not settled in the most flourishing immortal city in the world. Even though there were many people here and it was as vast as the ocean, the True Immortal Alliance and the Floating Clouds Agency, which had a deep foundation, might really be searching for a needle in a haystack in this huge city. Therefore, Chen He's family was settled in a small city 300 miles north of the immortal city. When Chen He made this request to Lu Chen, it was during the day. That night, a group of Fuyunji elites arrived at the small city called Hohat. This group was personally appointed by Xueying, but the leadership was given to Lu Chen. No matter how you looked at it, this seemed to be a tactful expression of goodwill from Xueying. Moreover, other than the 10 Fuyunji people, there were 3 more people in the group. They were all experts that the Kunlun party had recently dispatched. It could be seen that Xueying seemed to be slowly integrating these new forces. However, he did not know if it was a coincidence, but among these 3 people, Lu Chen knew 2 of them. One was Su Qingjun, the other was He Yi, and the last person was a complete stranger to him. Her name was Kai Jingyi, and she was also a Kunlun party expert who had cultivated to the Jin Dan realm. Including Lu Chen, this group had a total of 14 people, but only Lu Chen knew the final destination. In reality, even in Fuyunji, there might be a few people who knew about tonight's operation, but the only one who knew the final goal was Xueying. Lu Chen led the group along the way. Although he did not say the final goal, everyone understood that this was an extremely important matter, so no one asked too many questions. However, on the way, Lu Chen's gaze would occasionally sweep over the 2 people he was familiar with. Su Qingjuan's expression was calm, as if there was no emotion on her face. Occasionally, when her gaze met Lu Chen's, she would also nod slightly in acknowledgement. In comparison, He Yi's attitude was very complicated and ambiguous. Basically, he also kept a cold face throughout the journey, but when Lu Chen saw him, his reaction was very different from before. At first, he ignored him, cold and indifferent, but later on, who knew what he thought of along the way, his attitude gradually softened, and in the end he even took the initiative to smile at Lu Chen. Even with Lu Chen's rich experience, in front of this he still could not guess what this person was thinking. After rushing all the way, they finally reached the outskirts of Hohat City at night. Only then did the group know that this was the destination of their trip. For the first time, Lu Chen told everyone the goal of this trip, which was to find and rescue Chen He's family, and then returned to the immortal city of Fuyunji. Recently, many people in Zhengxianmeng had heard about the legend of the stubborn Qin He. Although no one had really come out to confirm it, and it seemed to be an unfounded rumor, but today, after hearing this news, everyone knew that Qin He had actually been instigated by this new disciple of perfected Lord Tianlan. The attitudes of the 10 people in Fuyunji immediately changed. Although because of the subtle difference in their positions, everyone maintained a certain distance, but these people who were selected by Shui Ying were of course the elites of Fuyunji, and were also people who had fought against the devil cult for many years. Of course, they understood how important it was to be able to instigate such a high-level person to defect. Therefore, when everyone looked at Lu Qin again, there was a hint of admiration in their eyes. They no longer thought of Lu Qin as an insignificant person who relied on perfected Lord Tianlan to advance. Among the 3 from the Kunlun party, Kai Jingyi probably did not know much about the devil cult, so her reaction was normal. Su Qingjun, on the other hand, was calm on the surface, her eyes bright, as if she was in a good mood. An He, on the other hand, had a complicated expression. He stared at Lu Qin from the side, and did not speak for a long time. In short, under everyone's different reactions, Lu Qin made the final arrangements, and then led the group straight to the northwest corner of the city, where Qin He's family lived. For cultivators, this distance would only take them a short while to cover. The night was silent, and there was no one on the long street. In front of them was a very ordinary-looking house. The door was tightly shut. In the dead of the night, the faint cold wind blew at the corner of Lu Qin's clothes. After that, a wave of strange sounds that seemed to be repressed, angry, fearful, and despairing could be heard intermittently. It was low and deep as it drifted through the darkness of the house. If it wasn't for the extraordinary hearing of a cultivator, it would really be difficult to hear it. Lu Qin stood in front of the door. Just as he was about to push it open, he suddenly raised his head and looked at the top right corner of the wooden door. To his surprise, he saw that in the dark corner, there was a bloody handprint. His face suddenly darkened, and his gaze turned cold. Chapter 499. Lu Qin silently pondered for a moment, retreated back from the door and then directly summoned the 10 Fuyunji men over, quietly instructed a few words, at the same time pointed to the bloody handprint on the main door. The members of the Floating Clouds division turned their heads to look. However, they did not reveal any surprised expressions. At most, a few of them frowned slightly before nodding their heads in agreement. Following which, the 10 Fuyunji men silently dispersed, started to sweep towards the 4 corners of the house. Looking at their direction, most likely very soon they would be able to surround the house tightly, almost not leaving any gaps. This was a very strange feeling. It looked like there were only 10 of them, but it felt like there were hundreds and thousands of them. Those who were not sent out by Lu Qin were the 3 Kunlun party men. Right now they were still standing behind Lu Qin. Towards Lu Qin's decision, the Fuyunji people did not express any objections. Among the 3 Kunlun people, Su Qingjun and he did not speak, instead that Kai Jingyi quietly spoke, indicating that he could also help. Lu Qin very simply replied to his question, indicated that this kind of encirclement and interception looked simple but was actually not easy. The Fuyunji people were all experienced. Tonight they would be the first to do it. As for the remaining 4 people including himself, of course they would not just stand there and watch, just based on their skills. The 4 of them were actually the strongest, therefore directly breaking the door, this kind of crude and simple but at the same time dangerous matter, was left to them. Hearing his words, Kai Jingyi also quietened down. It could be seen that although his skills were not bad, but tonight was the first time against the evil sect, he was somewhat excited and also somewhat nervous. Instead, the other 2 youths, Su Qingjun and He, were very calm. Lu Qin glanced at them, his eyes revealing an inquiring look. Very quickly, Su Qingjun and He both nodded to indicate that they had no objections and were already prepared. Lu Qin glanced afar again, saw that after a while, the 10 Fuyunji elite soldiers had already concealed themselves in the darkness around the house, completed the encirclement. Lu Qin nodded and then again walked towards the house's main door, glanced at the bloody handprint, stretched his hand and pressed on the door. The wooden door must have had some years. It was no longer that smooth and flat, A little roughness could be felt. Lu Chen's hand pressed on the middle of the door, his face calm but deep in his eyes. A dark flame suddenly flashed past. The three people behind Lu Chen all glanced at him. Although they could not completely see Lu Chen's cultivation method, the hidden power was still very strong. It was enough for them, Golden Elixir Realm cultivators, to see it. A low and light sound was heard. The door bolt behind the door seemed to have broken, separated by a thick door, and then fell to the ground. Lu Chen's hand slightly exerted force. The door creaked open. Lu Chen turned and nodded to the three behind and then stepped in. Su Qingjun and the rest followed. At this moment, it was really late at night. Everything was quiet. In the cold and cheerless night, there was not the slightest movement apart from the faintly discernible groan of pain. However, in the next moment, Lu Chen, who looked abnormally calm, suddenly rushed forward. His speed was so fast that there was even a sharp whistle on the spot, startling the three behind him. They only saw him rushing through the entrance, not taking the main path of the courtyard, but directly pouncing on a big tree in the corner of the courtyard. A moment later, an angry roar came from the tree, but Lu Chen's figure instantly disappeared into the shadow of the tree, followed by a shrill scream that echoed through the night. At the same time, there was a commotion in the depths of the mansion, and several voices shouted angrily. Lu Chen floated back to the ground, and without even looking back, he waved his hand and rushed into the mansion with the other three people. The moment he waved his hand, one of his palms was already full of blood, and when he rushed forward, behind them, a person fell down from the big tree, heavily hit the ground, his body twisted and convulsed, blood flowed out from his body. It looked like he would not survive. Amidst the hubbub, Lu Chen and the rest rushed straight into the backyard and immediately smelled a strong stench of blood. Corpses started to appear on the ground, and at the same time, someone cried out in alarm and anger. The evil faction demons rushed out from a few houses and started to fight with them. Su Qingjun and the rest went up to meet them. This confrontation, the difference in strength between the two sides was very directly displayed. Although Lu Chen's side had fewer people, but each of them were valiant, placed in a famous sect like the Kunlun Party, Su Qingjun and the rest were also the best in the Jindan realm. Other than Yuaning Zhenren, they were almost invincible. Now that the evil faction had been in decline for many years, where would they still have so many masters? This confrontation, a round of killing, immediately they retreated. In a blink of an eye, a few of them fell. Seeing that the situation was not good, the incoming enemy was too strong, immediately there were people from the evil faction who shouted and fled. As a result, a few figures flew up the wall beside, and all of them scattered at the same time, each escaping in different directions, seemed to be very experienced. Su Qingjun just wanted to chase but was held back by Lu Chen, then heard Lu Chen said in a deep voice, "Don't care about those who escaped, it's more important to split up and save people first." Su Qingjun nodded and agreed. The four of them scattered and ran towards different houses. And in the distance, those evil sect evil men who had just rushed up the wall and were about to escape. At this moment, cries of alarm were heard. From the dark shadows, sinister and vicious weapons were flashing, crafty hidden weapons were flying out, and there were also all kinds of tricks. For a moment, not knowing how many unlucky people were hit, like dumplings, fell down from the wall. Quite a number of them were extremely angry and cursed out loud. Naturally, no one cared about those evil faction remnants' despair outside. In the house, Su Qingjun carried her long sword and searched all the way. She saw that there was no one in the two houses, but on the way, there were one or two corpses lying on the ground. Looking at the clothes, they seemed to be servant girls, and the state of their death was rather miserable. Her expression was not good. Suddenly she saw a glimmer of light flashed in a house ahead and immediately extinguished. Something strange seemed to be happening. Her expression changed, quietly leaned over, quietly waited at the door for a moment. Suddenly her body knocked open the door and directly rushed in. Immediately, a loud cry was heard from inside the house. Mixed with a woman's cry of alarm, two black figures in the darkness pounced towards Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun turned, waved her long sword. A ray of moonlight suddenly lit up in the darkness, illuminating her cold, beautiful face, broke through the shadows and slashed down. The sound of the wind stopped. Everything seemed to stop at that moment. Moonlight slash. This was the Kunlun party's famous unique skill. Naturally, its power was extremely great. In a single exchange, a miserable cry was heard. One of the black figures flew out directly, while the other black figure stood stiffly on the spot, not moving for a moment. Then blood appeared. A moment later, a hoarse cry was heard, directly fell to the ground, blood gushing out. Only Su Qingjuan's face did not show any joy, but suddenly a trace of anger flashed past. Right now, with that flash of light, she could see the situation in the house clearly. The two people who pounced were naturally the evil faction's demons, and almost half of their bodies were naked. There was a huge wound on the chest of the man who was killed by her just now. It seemed that he was dead, but the other man took a few steps back and suddenly grabbed a nearly naked woman. He placed the blade on her white neck and said in a hoarse voice, "Stop, or I'll kill her." After saying that, he exerted force. Immediately a stream of blood flowed down from that woman's neck. Chapter 500. There was only a glimmer of light in the dimly lit room, but one could vaguely see that the woman's appearance was rather beautiful. Probably because of this, she was humiliated, but at the moment she was struggling at death's door. It seemed that she was still not out of danger and could die at any time in the hands of this exasperated and desperate evil cult heretic. Su Qingjun blocked the way out of the door but did not step forward. Facing this situation, she was somewhat at a loss. When the evil cult heretic saw that Su Qingjun had no intention of giving way, he became even more anxious and angry. He stretched out his hand and the knife made a cut on the woman's body. Immediately, a wound appeared on her smooth shoulder and blood gushed out. The woman immediately screamed. Following that, the evil cult heretic roared, "Get lost, this slut is Qinhe's wife. If you don't move, just wait to collect her corpse." Qinhe's wife? Su Qingjun was shocked and could not help but take another look at the woman. Her heart suddenly hesitated. This group of people had hurriedly marched from afar and rushed here overnight. Wasn't it to bring Qinhe's family back? If there were any accidents and the people they brought back turned into corpses, then Lu Chen's plan would all be in vain. The long sword in Su Qingjuan's hand slowly drooped down. Although her face was filled with disgust, her body still subconsciously started to slowly retreat. The evil cult heretic saw this and was overjoyed. He laughed wildly and grabbed the woman and ran out. He did not care that the woman's clothes were tattered and she was in an extremely sorry state. However, when they were near the door, the woman suddenly cried and struggled, as if no matter what, she did not want to walk out of the room. The evil cult heretic was furious and waved his hand. "Papa!" 2 slaps, causing the woman to cry bitterly. Su Qingjun was so angry that her face turned white. She raised the long sword in her hand and was about to stab. However, at this moment, the evil cult heretic was extremely vigilant. He turned and grabbed the woman's throat, glaring at her and said, "If you want her to die, then come over." Su Qingjun could only forcefully stop her body. The anger and grievance in her heart almost overflowed. Her pair of bright eyes stared fixedly at the vicious thief. That devil cult sorcerer seemed to have noticed Su Qingjuan's current state of hesitation and became more and more savage. Facing Su Qingjuan's murderous gaze, not only was he not afraid, but he even looked at Su Qingjun with a lascivious gaze. Then he licked his lips and said, "Little girl, you're lucky today. I'll remember you." As he spoke, he let out a maniacal laugh. As for the unspoken meaning in his words, no one could think about it. Just that Su Qingjun was an intelligent girl. This time, her chest almost exploded with anger. At the same time, her cheeks were crimson red and her face was filled with murderous intent. She could not wait to immediately rush up and dismember this person's body, but in the end, she could only stand there powerlessly. That evil cult heretic sneered and dragged the woman out of the door. Just as he was about to escape, suddenly at this moment, in the darkness outside the door, in the corner beside the door, a black dagger that almost completely blended in with the surrounding darkness silently pierced out from the darkness. It went straight into the chest from the back, piercing through the heart. That evil cult heretic's body shook greatly, his entire body suddenly stiffened. A moment later, a shadow flashed out from the darkness. It was the expressionless Lu Chen. He stretched out his hand and pushed. Immediately, that evil cult heretic together with the woman fell back into that house. That woman screamed and rolled on the ground twice. Suddenly, she realized that she had left that scoundrel's control and immediately crawled forward with all her might. Su Qingjun, who was at the side, rushed up and first stood in between the woman and the evil cult heretic. Then she slashed her sword towards that person. The moonlight suddenly appeared, lighting up a cold halo. Following that, blood blossomed. That evil cult heretic's entire body was sent flying by this sword. In midair, one could see that his flesh and blood were already badly mutilated. It could be seen how powerful Su Qingjuan's sword was. With a bang sound, that mutilated body hit the wall at the side and then rolled down. At the same time, Lu Chen, who was at the door, had just walked in. Su Qingjun hatefully looked at that evil cult heretic who could not be more dead. Then, she heaved a sigh of relief and turned to look at Lu Chen. If it wasn't for Lu Chen's sudden appearance and ambush outside the door, she most likely would not have been able to do anything to this person. So, Su Qingjun revealed a rare smile. Just as she was about to speak, she suddenly saw that Lu Chen had just walked into the house and immediately turned his back. His first action was to directly close the door. The room suddenly became a few degrees darker. Su Qingjun was still in shock. Lu Chen instead maintained a posture of facing the door with his back facing them. He opened his mouth and said, "Lady, please wait." Su Qingjun was startled, and then she was horrified. She quickly turned around and saw that the woman was hiding beside the bed, holding a pair of scissors that she'd taken out of nowhere. The scissors were aimed at her throat, and it seemed as if she was about to stab it in. "Don't be like this," Su Qingjun cried out. That woman's face was filled with despair and pain. Tears flowed down her face and she said with a trembling voice, I don't want to live anymore. But there are still my 2 children in the cellar in the backyard. I beg you to save them. Send them to their father's side. Even if Lady Chen. Suddenly, Lu Chen, who had been standing motionlessly by the door with his back facing them, suddenly opened his mouth and directly interrupted her mournful words. He said in a deep voice, "Please listen to me. I am Lu Chen. This lady is called Su Qingjun. Both of us are disciples of the Kunlun party. We came here today to rescue you and meet Chen He." Speaking until here, he paused for a moment and then said in a calm tone, "Tonight, we passed by this house and found 2 evil cult demons. We killed them. Then we found Lady hiding in the neighboring room and went to the cellar together to rescue the children. This is what happened." The 2 women in the room were silent for a moment. Their faces showed surprise. Lu Chen then turned to look at Su Qingjun and said, "Qingjun, is it like this?" Su Qingjun took a deep breath and nodded heavily. Then she looked at the woman with sympathy and said, "That's right. If others ask, I will also say the same. I will never mention what happened tonight again." The woman was stunned at first. Then her body trembled and her breathing became rapid. Tears kept flowing. Gradually, the scissors in her hands slowly drooped down. Su Qingjun breathed a sigh of relief and looked at her with some relief. Suddenly, she heard Lu Chen's voice again. "Qingjun, help find a new set of clothes for the woman to change into." Su Qingjun suddenly came to her senses and quickly walked over to support the woman. The woman grabbed her hand and nodded again and again. It seemed that she didn't know what to say, but also seemed to be a bit frightened and doubtful. Su Qingjun comforted her in a low voice and then let her find another set of clothes in the room to change into. In this dark night, she and Lu Chen were willing and trying hard to cover up such a secret. But at this time, suddenly, there was a burst of footsteps in the corridor outside the door. A moment later, a voice sounded. It was he. He stopped in front of the door and knocked on it, saying, "Lu Chen, junior sister Su, I think I heard some commotion over here. Did something happen?" The room was silent for a moment. The woman's face suddenly revealed a nervous and frightened expression. Su Qingjun looked back and found that Lu Chen's brows were wrinkled. His eyes were staring deeply, as if he wasn't looking at the wooden door, but the figure standing in the darkness outside the door. Chapter 501. Su Qingjun was also anxious. looked at Lu Chen and was about to speak when Lu Chen's clear voice said, "He Xixiang, there are two evil faction heretics hiding in the house. Shiji Su and I discovered them, and after a fierce battle, we have eliminated them." He Yi's figure was faintly reflected in the window. After hearing Lu Chen's words, he still stood outside and did not move. After a while he said, "I see. Do you need me to come in and help?" That woman used her hand to cover her chest. Her face was full of pleading and she shook her head desperately. Su Qingjun walked over and blocked in front of her, gently patted her body to comfort her. At the same time, her eyes glanced at Lu Chen. Lu Chen seemed to feel her eyes behind him, nodded slightly and very calmly said to the door, "Thank you He Xixiang. Everything is fine here. Shiji Su and I will search again. We will come out later. We don't need to trouble you." He stood outside and was silent for a while, then said, "That's good." After speaking, he walked forward and disappeared outside the window. It was quiet in the house. Outside the house, the sound of footsteps gradually fading away, mixed with some intense fighting and cursing sounds from further away. It should be the fight between those fleeing evil sect demons who were intercepted by the Fuyun Division's men. But to the three people here, it seemed to be very far away right now. When the footsteps finally disappeared, that woman's expression relaxed, but she staggered and almost fell to the ground. Su Qingjun quickly hugged her, softly comforted her, and then turned to speak to Lu Chen, but Lu Chen suddenly turned his head, put his hand on his mouth and made a "keep quiet" gesture. Su Qingjun was startled. Lu Chen slowly walked over. At the same time he said in a clear voice, "Shiji Su, these two evil faction heretics' bodies, how do you think we should deal with them?" Su Qingjun was intelligent. Her eyes looked outside the door and had already understood. After a moment, she carried that woman and walked inside, calmly said, "You do as you see fit, I will look around again." While they were talking, their hands did not stop. Lu Chen dragged the two dead evil faction heretics together. Su Qingjun covered the woman and let her change into the clothes she had just taken out. After the woman changed her clothes, Lu Chen nodded to the two of them and walked over to open the door. He then dragged the two corpses out and threw them into the courtyard. At the same time, his eyes calmly looked around, saw that the huge house was in a mess. There were shadows moving everywhere, but overall, it seemed that their side had the upper hand. Those evil faction heretics who bullied women, children, old and young might be extremely vicious, but if they really met the elite good faction masters, with the evil faction's current weakness, they were basically powerless to resist. In a shadowy corner far away, he looked at Lu Chen for a while and then looked at the two corpses that he had thrown into the courtyard. After a moment of silence, expressionlessly retreated and soon disappeared into the darkness. And Lu Chen, who was at the door, waited for a while, seemed to sense something, then made a gesture to the house behind him. Su Qingjun then led that woman out. Lu Chen very directly said, "Lead us to save your child." That woman nodded heavily and quickly led them to the backyard. In the dark night, her clothes fluttered, plain and peaceful, covering her injuries and also covering the ugly truth not long ago. This night quickly quietened down. The night deepened and the chaos in the house also calmed down. This time the evil faction sent as many as 18 people. Obviously they had the intention of exterminating the entire family, not letting a single Chen family member escape. But in the end, 9 died and 9 were injured. It could be said that they were completely wiped out. The Chen family side also suffered a lot of casualties. The maids and servants died the most. 3 or 4 of their relatives and friends also died. But the most important thing was, Chen He's wife and 2 children were spared from the calamity. This was because when the calamity suddenly happened, after those evil faction evil people rushed in during the night, Chen Furen immediately hid the children in an extremely secluded cellar and instructed them not to make any noise or come out. The cellar had been built long ago. It was exceptionally secluded. Even a cultivator would find it hard to discover. But because of this, the underground space was very narrow, only enough to accommodate 1 person, barely able to fit 2 children. Lady Chen herself could not go any further. This kind of secluded and narrow cellar was almost useless on normal days, but Chen He secretly built such a place in his own house, probably to guard against something. Lady Chen was humiliated but managed to escape with her life in the end. Her luck was naturally good. But it was also because those two evil faction sorcerers forced her to reveal the whereabouts of the Qin family's two children while they were being tortured. Naturally, Lady Chen would rather die than reveal the truth and persevered until Lu Chen and the rest arrived. After that, there was no need to stay in this small city for long. Everything could not be compared to the immortal city where Zhengxianmeng's main hall was located, so after a few leaders discussed, Lu Chen very quickly made a decision. Everyone rushed back to the immortal city overnight. The journey was long, and many of the Chen clan members were mortals without any cultivation. Fortunately, the people of the Fuyun agency were very resourceful, and they actually managed to get a few carriages to send them on. Then, everyone left the small city together. In the middle of the night, where did they get these horse carriages and horses? Because of these horse carriages, the speed of returning was much slower than when they came, but no matter what, this time at least they had more or less completed their mission, so everyone was still relatively relaxed and happy. Lu Chen walked at the back of the group, probably to cover the back. As he walked, he found that Su Qingjun had unknowingly come to his side, walking with him. He smiled at her. She was silent, as if she did not want to smile, but in the end she still slightly pursed her lips, then softly said, "These evil faction villains really do all kinds of evil, they deserve to die." Lu Chen nodded, said, "So, if you meet them in the future, don't be lenient." Su Qingjun made a sound. After a moment of silence, said, "That Lady Chen's matter, you handled it very well." After a pause, she said, "Much better than what I wanted to do at that time. This is indeed the best. Just that I don't understand, why did you think of doing this at that time?" Lu Chen was silent for a while, said, "I have seen women who had this kind of experience. Once the news of their humiliation spread, very few of them could survive." After a moment he added, "Most of them died by suicide. What killed was not only knives, axes and weapons, but also the tongue and words." Su Qingjun was silent. For a moment she did not know what to say. Finally she softly said, "This matter, let's never mention it again for the rest of our lives." Lu Chen frowned and walked forward. Su Qingjun's countenance suddenly changed, grabbed Lu Chen's arm, stood where she was and stared at this man's eyes, her face revealing nervousness and solemnity. She lowered her voice, using a voice that only she and Lu Chen could hear, said word by word, "Tell me, you did this good deed to save her." Lu Chen looked at Su Qingjun's bright and clear as the bright moon eyes. After a moment, he slowly nodded and said, "I am." Su Qingjun heaved a long sigh of relief, slowly loosened her grip on his arm, and then smiled sweetly. This was the first time in this dark night that she smiled happily. Chapter 502. There were no more accidents along the way. After daybreak, the group arrived at Immortal City and returned to Mount Tianlong. Mount Tianlong was where the headquarters of Zhengxianmeng was located. It was a place that had been in operation for hundreds and thousands of years. Naturally, it was the safest place in the world. There was no need to worry about people from the devil cult jumping out to kill them. They walked all the way to the main hall of Kunlun. Fuyunji's people dispersed. The few leaders still had to report to Shuang. Su Qingjun and the other 3 people from Kunlun party had also completed their task. After a few words of discussion with Lu Chen, they also left. Before leaving, Lu Chen also deliberately glanced at Su Qingjun. He saw that this woman's expression was gentle. She should be in a good mood. When they entered the main hall, they brought the remaining relatives and friends of the Qin family to meet Qin He. Naturally, it was a scene of sorrow and joy. This time, they did not save all of the Qin family. In fact, before they arrived, many people had died. However, the silver lining in the misfortune was that Madame Chen and their 2 children were saved. Then, they were escorted here, safe and sound. Chen He and his wife and children hugged each other and cried. The scene was touching. Then he looked at his relatives and friends. He found that a few of his closest relatives had passed away. Among them were his parents. At this time he was angry and sad. He cried and bowed to the ground. Lu Chen watched from the side for a while. Then he quietly left and walked to the main hall of Kunlun. There was already a jar of good wine in his hand. He leaned on the high doorsill and looked at the distant sky, drinking in big mouthfuls. Old Ma appeared outside the main hall. He walked all the way to the front. When he came near, he first glanced at the wine jar in Lu Chen's hand. Seeing that it was already half empty, he could not help but frown. He said to Lu Chen, "I say, you have been drinking more and more recently. Too much wine is bad for your body." Lu Chen smiled and said, "What kind of body do we cultivators have? Why would we be afraid of wine harming our body? Only ordinary mortals would be bothered by this. It's not a big deal." Old Ma thought about it and found it to be true. Over the years, he had rarely heard of a cultivator's body being damaged because of alcohol addiction. However, he still said, even so, getting drunk can indeed confuse one's mind, and it is somewhat detrimental to cultivation. You shouldn't indulge in it. Lu Chen laughed and patted Old Ma's shoulder. "We've been drinking for more than 10 years since we were in Qingshatang village. When did anything happen? Don't worry." "Yes." Old Ma nodded and stopped talking about it. Then, he turned to look at the depths of the hall and said, "How's it going inside?" Lu Chen hugged the wine jar and sat down on the threshold. After a while, he said, "They're probably still comforting those who just escaped from the gates of hell." Old Ma sighed and also sat down beside Lu Chen. He looked up at the sky in the distance and suddenly said after a while, "For people in our line of work, it's probably better not to have family." Lu Chen took a sip of wine and didn't respond. Old Ma didn't care and just said lightly, "Without family and friends, there's nothing to worry about. They won't give others a handle on them, and they won't be overcautious when doing things. Otherwise, even the toughest man will be played by others." Lu Chen smiled and said, "You're right. But is the kind of life you're talking about still a human life?" Old Ma was silent for a while and said, "Whether it's a human life or not, haven't you lived it for decades?" Lu Chen was stunned for a while and then laughed. He stood up and suddenly stretched his foot to kick Old Ma. Old Ma smiled and stepped aside. Lu Chen shook his head. His face was calm, but his eyes were deep and no one could see any emotion in them. Old Ma stood with him for a while and then said, "I'll go back and have a look. Now that I've brought his family here, it's time to start doing something big." Lu Chen nodded, but when Old Ma took a few steps, he suddenly called out to him, "Old Ma." Old Ma looked back at him. Lu Chen looked at him and said in a very calm tone, "When you were talking about living alone, you only said you to me, and not we, as you often said when you were suffering in the village a few years ago." He looked at Old Ma with a faint smile and said, "Do you mean that you're different from me? Do you have any relatives or family?" Old Ma's face changed slightly, and then he laughed and scolded, "Bullsh *T. I've been a bachelor all my life, and it's all because of you." After saying that, he even spat and then walked away. Lu Chen smiled as he watched Old Ma's receding figure. After Old Ma's figure gradually disappeared, the smile on Lu Chen's face slowly disappeared. It became a little cold with a hint of bitterness. He turned around and looked at the sky outside the main hall. The bright sky sprinkled on his body, and it seemed to make Lu Chen feel a little uncomfortable, and he slightly narrowed his eyes. He took a step back and stood behind the thick door of the main hall. There was a shadow on the other side, blocking the light, and his expression seemed to be a little relaxed. Then, he thought for a while, picked up the wine jar, and took a big gulp of wine. Then, he muttered to himself, "The person who is hated by gods and devils, I'm talking about you. If one stayed in the dark for too long, he would not be used to the light in the day. Or perhaps, he had long been used to the loneliness in the shadow, if he had never seen the warmth in the light." Like a lonely child who craved that warmth too much, he would subconsciously ask for it, to pursue it, and then forget the shadow behind him. He would unknowingly devour others. When dusk fell again, Chen He, who looked a little tired, followed Old Ma out. They walked all the way to the front of the Kunlun main hall and found that Lu Chen did not seem to have the elegance of a perfected lord's successor at the moment. Instead, he sat directly on the ground behind the door, in the somewhat dim shadow, quietly sitting. Beside him, there were 2 empty wine jars. Chen He was stunned for a moment, and Old Ma frowned, a little worried. However, the next moment, when Lu Chen looked up at them, his unusually bright and sharp eyes still made their hearts tremble. After a moment, Chen He was the first to react. He took a step forward, bowed to Lu Qin, and said solemnly, "Thank you, young Master Lu, for saving my family, allowing them to escape from disaster. I dare not express my gratitude, but if there is any need in the future, I, Qin He, will definitely serve you with my life." Lu Qin stood up, held him up, patted him on the shoulder, and sighed again. "Speaking of which, I also feel a little guilty. There are still a few relatives and friends in your residence that I did not manage to save. I am sorry." Chen He's eyes were slightly red, and he shook his head. "Young master, don't worry. This is God's will. I am already satisfied to be able to save my wife and my 2 children. As for the rest," he gritted his teeth and said hatefully, "I will repay you in the future." Life was like turning the pages of a book, and the changes were too fast. Lu Qin lightly muttered in his heart, then asked, "How are your wife and the 2 young masters now?" Chen He said, "They have been on the road for a whole night, and they are too frightened, so they are now asleep. However, my wife has mentioned young master to me several times before, only praising young master's righteousness. You saved my family from a life and death crisis, and you are the Qin family's great benefactor. She also urged me to serve young master and avenge my family." Lu Qin was silent for a moment, then nodded and said, "Your wife is really a reasonable person." Chapter 503. In the huge underground city of the Immortal City, the day seemed to be similar to the past. Many cultivators in the starry hall of Xianxia were busy setting up. From afar, they looked like diligent ants, receiving orders and concentrating on completing their mission. The runes and talismans that were gradually taking shape from nothing seemed to be forming a huge formation. However, no one knew what it would be used for in the end. The strange blood moon in the sky was still floating in the air, emitting a blood-red light. However, it would occasionally tremble violently. The red light trembled and swept across the huge space. Perfected Lord Tianlan came to the underground maze again. As expected, he found Perfected Lord Guyu at the huge statue in the center of the city. After greeting him, Perfected Lord Tianlan sat down and looked at the blood moon above him. "I looked at it for a while. Why do I feel that the blood moon is a little unstable?" Perfected Lord Guyu glanced at him and nodded. "You're right." Perfected Lord Tianlan raised his brow and revealed a smile. "Does that mean that the day is coming soon?" True Monarch Guyu shook her head, and after a moment of silence, she said, "This is really hard to say. The blood moon is a strange phenomenon of the heavens and earth. It has its own fiendish intent. It is hard to predict, and there are not many records of it in the ancient books. Even I am unable to calculate it right now. I can only ponder and probe here in hopes that I will be able to discover it a little earlier if there really is a change." As he spoke, he paused for a moment before continuing. "The blood moon is indeed a little unstable these few days, and its movements are slowly increasing. From what I can see, it's probably going to enter the turbulent period before it truly changes. However, I'm not sure how long this period will be." Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded. "That's what I should do. Anyway, it's been hard on you. We'll wait for this day to come." Guyu True Monarch suddenly laughed and said, "From your tone, it seems like victory is already in your grasp. Although your cultivation is high and you're the strongest in the Immortal Alliance, you can't underestimate your enemy." Perfected Lord Tianlan chuckled. He didn't have any intention of being humble. "They're just some useless chickens and dogs. We'll act according to the plan. There's no reason we can't win." Perfected Lord Guyu laughed and pointed at him. He shook his head and didn't say anything else. After a while, he seemed to have thought of something and asked Perfected Lord Tianlan, "Oh right, how are your subordinates doing with the demonic cult? I heard that your new disciple is doing quite well." Perfected Lord Tianlan said indifferently, "What do you mean by doing well? It's just young people messing around." Perfected Lord Tianlan said indifferently, "What? It's just the young people messing around. As for the demonic cult, they're doomed. The Devil Sect and our true Immortal Alliance have been fighting for 1,000 years, but now they have declined to such an extent." As he spoke, he revealed a sorrowful look, probably thinking of the heyday of the evil sect. Comparing the two, he could not help but despise the current evil sect. Perfected Lord Tianlan flicked his sleeves, got up, and walked away. At the same time, he said, "He's just a clown, not worth mentioning. You, on the other hand, are very important. If there are any major changes, remember to inform me as soon as possible." True Lord Guyu looked at his back and said, "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." Seeing Perfected Lord Tianlan leave, Perfected Lord Guyu looked up at the blood moon in the sky and closed her eyes, looking like an old monk in meditation. However, in that strange blood-red light, his originally calm appearance seemed to have an extra hint of coldness and killing intent. In the great hall of Fuyunji, Shui Ying, Lu Chen, and Qin He sat in a quiet room. Aside from them, there was no one else. At this moment, Chen He's gaze swept across Shui Ying's enchanting, beautiful, yet dignified face. He sighed in his heart. The Floating Clouds Agency had been fighting against the devil cult for many years. As the leader of the Floating Clouds Agency, Shui Ying was naturally a great enemy of the devil cult. If there was an assassination list, this woman would at least be ranked in the top 3. The blood feud that once would turn hostile and fight to the death the moment they met was now sitting peacefully in this room. Even if they were not joking, it was clear that everyone's goal was the same. That was to get rid of the mysterious elder ghost of the demonic cult. The twists and turns of life were so strange that it was hard to predict. When Lu Chen turned his head to look at Chen He suddenly came to his senses and realized that he had been lost in thought just now. He nodded to the man and woman who held great power in front of him, then stretched out his finger and pointed at the map on the table in front of them. Elder Ghost's whereabouts are mysterious and he is naturally suspicious. He almost never meets with ordinary demonic cult members. Instead, every 5 to 7 years he will train a messenger to take charge of the demonic cult in Immortal City. "Of course, I am one of the messengers," Qin He said in a low voice. Lu Chen and Shui Ying looked at each other, a trace of excitement in their eyes. Chen He's position was indeed unique. After inciting this person, it could be said that they had the demonic cult's throat in their hands. Come to think of it, these few years the evil faction was too weak. The only person who could be on the stage was the mysterious elder ghost. If it was in the heyday of the past, how could there possibly be such a person? "Where did he meet you?" Lu Chen asked. Shui Ying, who was sitting on the side, also stared at Chen He, obviously very nervous. Unexpectedly, Chen He smiled bitterly and drew a big circle on the Immortal City map on the table, saying, "Other than the Azure Dragon district of Sky Dragon Mountain where your Xianxia is, I have been called by him to meet the other 3 places, White Tiger, Vermilion Bird and Black Tortoise. Counting carefully in these few years, I have met him at a total of 63 places." Lu Chen and Shui Ying were both shocked and looked at Chen He in disbelief. Chen He continued, "As far as I know, Elder Ghost has a unique characteristic. Even when the divine sect, evil sect was still flourishing, and the other elders were running amok in the world, he was still lurking in the Immortal City. For decades, no matter how the world situation changed, no matter how dangerous it was, he still refused to leave the Immortal City." Lu Chen's heart suddenly moved, and Shui Ying seemed to have thought of something. After pondering for a moment, she asked Chen He, "Do you know the reason?" Chen He shook his head and said, "I don't know this, and I feel that other than Elder Ghost himself, no one else in the demonic cult knows the reason." Shui Ying nodded and said no more. Lu Chen then asked, "Then can you find Elder Ghost?" Chen He thought for a moment and said, "In the past, he used a secret technique to tell me where to meet him. Now, it is naturally impossible. But if we check the 63 places we met in the past, we should find. Those 63 places he probably gave up after seeing them once or twice." Shui Ying suddenly interrupted him, her gaze hidden deep, looked at Chen He and said, "But you remember all of them?" Chen He's expression did not change, and he said calmly, "I have a very good memory." Lu Chen smiled and said, "It's a good thing to have a good memory. Come, tell us how we can find that old turtle from these places." Chapter 504. In this world, the human heart was the most unpredictable thing. Most of the time, you would think that you already knew a person's character and behavior very well, But on a certain day, or when something unexpected happened, you would often see some other deeply hidden things that would shock you and make you feel incredulous. Or perhaps, there would be a feeling that the past did not seem real. This kind of thing happened to many people. Some people revealed it, and some people might not have the opportunity to do so in their entire lives. As for whether it was right or wrong, good or bad, it was up to each person to have their own opinions. However, there was a kind of person who was particularly eye-catching when it came to this kind of thing, because this kind of huge change was bound to happen to them. They were patient, tenacious, lurking, and even wearing masks, living a familiar life. But one day, they suddenly threw away their masks, tore off their disguise, and revealed their true colors. Then, they caused pain and shock to everyone around them. This kind of person had a dark and mysterious code name in Zhengxianmeng and Fiyunji, called the Shadow. And in the secular world, there was a more common and vulgar and contemptuous name, called the Traitor. Until now, Lu Chen and the others had already discovered that Qin He was a very complicated person. He could be loyal to the so-called God sect and would rather die than submit, but he could also turn hostile and ruthless in the blink of an eye. Moreover, Qin He did not think that he was a traitor. He had his own opinion on this kind of thing. He felt that what Lu Chen had done in the past was a traitor, and he himself had been forced to make this choice when he was at the end of his rope. He felt that he did not disappoint the world or the earth. After all, he had suffered so much for the God sect, but he was still loyal and unyielding. However, those who he had repaid with his life had repaid him by harming his family. This was intolerable. He had no choice but to rely on Zhengxianmeng and Fiyunji. It was all those bastards' fault. Of course, the man named Lu Chen had done a lot of things during this period, and his methods were not honorable. However, Qin He was very smart and did not hold a grudge against him. He was the only descendant of the famous Lord Tianlan, and also a new noble in Zhengxianmeng. He was an important person who held great power, including the life and death of his whole family. For such a person, he only needed to serve him loyally. It was useless to think about dissatisfaction and resentment. Moreover, his wife had said many good things about Lu Chen. In short, after Qin He put down the knot in his heart and relied on Zhengxianmeng, he immediately became a person who could adapt to circumstances. Since he had already decided to rely on Lu Chen, he quickly began to show his ability in front of Lu Chen. He began to lead Lu Chen, Shui Ying and Fiyunji's men to hunt down the remaining evil sect members and the remaining well-hidden spies in the huge immortal city. Yes, even after experiencing so many storms, there were still remnants of the devil sect in the immortal city. This sect that had been passed down for thousands of years still had a deep foundation, and there were still people secretly lurking in the shadows that no one knew about. However, Qin He was not an ordinary follower of the evil sect. His identity was extremely special. He was a messenger that was recently groomed by Elder Ghost. In the immortal city, he had a status that was second only to one and above tens of thousands. In other words, he knew far more secrets about the evil sect than most people. And this time, Qin He seemed to have gone all out. Once he turned hostile, he was even more ruthless and ruthless than the people of Fiyunji. He mercilessly killed his former comrades, with an attitude of not leaving a single blade of grass behind. Thus, in the immortal city, Fiyunji stirred up another reign of terror. That year, the number of people killed by Fiyunji in the immortal city was said to be unprecedented. Although it was not as exaggerated as a bloodbath, but many people in many places could smell the thick stench of blood. Then, in broad daylight, they saw some ordinary people being dragged out of their homes. Some were beaten up, some were killed on the streets. Then, to the onlookers who looked at each other in shock, they loudly announced that these were the remnants of the evil sect. To show his loyalty, Qin He took the lead in front of Lu Chen and Shui Ying, and even personally killed 5 to 6 people. He was very heavy-handed and his methods were very fierce. He looked as if he was afraid that others would think that he did not hate the evil sect's sorcerers. Lu Chen and Old Ma had been doing these things for the past few days. They had seen all of Qin He's methods. Most of the time, the two of them did not make a move. The ones charging in front were Qin He and the fierce elites of Fiyunji. They found a place to watch. Old Ma said to Lu Chen in a low voice, "Why do I feel that there is something wrong with this person's heart?" Lu Chen looked forward, his expression did not change. He also lowered his voice and said, "Don't talk nonsense. He is doing things for us." Old Ma sneered and shook his head. "I heard that he still thinks that he has a clear conscience?" Lu Chen glanced at him and frowned. "Come on, Chen, he has only chosen his own path. Naturally, he has to walk on this path. What's so strange about that?" Old Ma snorted and did not say more about these things. He changed the topic and asked, "Isn't the most important thing now to catch that old tortoise? Why do we keep catching these small fries?" Lu Chen said, "First, these are not small fries. They have hidden themselves so deeply. If it wasn't for Chen He, it would be almost impossible for us to dig them out. And after these people are dug out, the situation that the evil sect has been operating in the Immortal City for many years will almost completely collapse. This is very important. Secondly, Elder Ghost is cunning and suspicious. But no matter how he hides his tracks, he is like a mouse. He will always have a territory network. We are cutting off the blocked passages one by one. As long as that old tortoise still insists on not leaving the Immortal City, if this goes on, there will soon be a day where he has nowhere to escape to." Old Ma nodded. He did not seem to have much of an objection to Lu Chen's deduction. But after a moment, he suddenly asked curiously, "Say, why do you think that old tortoise Elder Ghost has been refusing to leave the Immortal City for so many years?" Lu Chen's eyes flashed slightly and said, "There should be some secret in this big city that attracts him." The two of them looked at each other. After a moment, they suddenly looked down at their feet at the same time. The ground was thick and flat. It extended all the way into the distance. Screams sounded in front of them. Blood splattered everywhere. Fresh blood flowed out from the dead bodies, staining the ground red and seeping into the soil. In the depths of the underground labyrinth, the blood moon flickered a few times. It seemed to be a little unstable, but it soon calmed down again. It emitted a strange blood-red light, shining on the empty and strange city below. After staying here for a few days, Supreme Guyu left today. After all, in the light of the blood moon, it had a lot of bad effects on the cultivators. He needed to take a break for a while. He, a spirit-severing perfected lord, was already like this. The other cultivators of the Starry Hall were naturally affected even more. So after many days, there were much fewer people busy here. At a glance, in the city in the bloodlight, there were probably less than 20 Starry Hall cultivators working. Compared to this huge city, the number of people was really pitiful. It could be said that there were almost none. It was also under such circumstances, in a quiet house not far from the statue in the center of the city, in a well that had long dried up in the backyard, a light patter suddenly sounded. After a moment, at the bottom of the dark well, a secret door made of a large piece of stone slowly opened. Chapter 505. The mechanism of the secret door was very intricately made. The stone used to make the secret door was not light, but when it was moved, it was almost silent. No one knew which skilled craftsman made it. The dry well was very deep, narrow at the top and wide at the bottom. Looking up from the bottom of the well, there seemed to be only a narrow sky. The sky was still blood-red. The bright red light of the blood moon could not reach the bottom of the deep dry well, so it was shrouded in darkness. When a dark figure slowly walked out of the darkness, he looked like a ghost. There was a faint light in the darkness. When the figure slowly raised his head, he found that the light was actually a strange fluorescence emitted from his eyes. He raised his head and looked at the small hole high up, as if he was thinking about something. With the help of the weak light, one could vaguely see that the mysterious figure's face was covered with a sinister and strange mask. The next moment, the light suddenly disappeared. The figure stood in the darkness, motionless, like a piece of rotten wood that had been standing there for many years, lifeless. After a while, on the high ground, there was a sudden sound of light footsteps. Then, it seemed that there were two people talking and walking over from not far away. No one approached the lifeless, ordinary, dry well. They did not even take a second look at it. When the footsteps gradually disappeared, the mysterious masked man in the darkness slowly opened his eyes again. The strange fluorescence appeared in the darkness again. He looked coldly at the hole leading to the outside, as if he was deep in thought. "How have you been doing recently?" Supreme Tianlan looked at Lu Chen and asked. At this moment, in the quiet hall of Kunlun, Supreme Tianlan and Lu Chen sat opposite each other. There was no one else around, and both of them were very relaxed. Leaning against the originally solemn lotus throne, Lu Chen held a wine jar in his hand and drank from it from time to time. After hearing Tianlan's words, Lu Chen put down the wine jar in his hand and said, "It's not bad. After Chen he defected to us, he led us to dig out many spies of the evil cult. Except for Elder Ghost, we have basically wiped out the evil cult's forces in Immortal City." As he said that, he paused for a moment before continuing, "Also, during this period of time, the cooperation with the Floating Clouds Company has been going well. However, it won't be that fast. After all, they are all proud soldiers that you personally trained. It won't be that easy for them to submit to you. Anyway, let's wait for a few more days, they are probably slowly accepting me." Supreme Tianlan nodded, looking quite satisfied and said, "You did better than I thought. It seems that my judgment is not bad, at least I didn't misjudge you all these years." Lu Chen clicked his tongue twice, raised his head, and took a big gulp of wine. After swallowing it, he said leisurely, "Actually, it's all thanks to you that I have a backer. When I have nothing to do, I will use you to boost my courage and pressure others. From time to time, I will remind the people of the Floating Clouds Agency that I have you backing me. I am also your only disciple, the future successor of the Foundation. If they don't cooperate with me or don't listen to my orders, I will immediately come back to complain. So, they are probably still afraid of you, so they have no choice but to obey me like this." Supreme Tianlan was startled for a while, then he laughed and slapped his knee. He said with a smile, "Kid, you are indeed black-hearted and thick-skinned. Won't you anger Shui Ying and the others to death by doing this?" Lu Chen said, "That won't happen. I have always respected Hall Master Shui Ying and rarely use my power to bully people. I always discuss things calmly. It's only because her subordinates are used to being arrogant that I used this method." Supreme Tianlan smiled and seemed to be in a good mood. He pointed at Lu Chen and said with a smile, "You are probably the only person in the world who dares to do this. How did those people react after you used your power to bully them?" Lu Chen thought for a while and couldn't help but laugh. He said, "Probably disgusted but have no choice but to give in. It's quite fun." As he said this, he looked at Supreme Tianlan and said, "What's wrong? Do you think there's a problem with this method? If you really think it's inappropriate, then I won't use it in the future." Supreme Tianlan rolled his eyes and said, "Use it, continue using it for me. As long as it's effective, use it." Lu Chen seemed to have expected him to say that, so he was not surprised. He just smiled and raised the wine jar to Perfected Lord Tianlan to show his respect and gratitude. Then he continued to drink. True Lord Tianlan didn't care that his disciple had no scruples in front of him. He continued, "If you really follow the rules of this old man's foundation, just like the disciples of the Kunlun sect, who are so serious that they look like saints, it would be strange if you can do anything well in this old man's foundation. Even if I pass the foundation to you in the future, it will probably fail in a few years at most." Lu Chen coughed and reminded Supreme Tianlan, "Don't forget, you are the Grand Emperor and old ancestor of the Kunlun party. Watch your words." Supreme Tianlan glared at him and said, "Bullsh*T, I've been cultivating and fighting for my entire life. Can't I even say something now?" Lu Chen was speechless. After a while, he waved his hand and said helplessly, All right. You're a soul formation perfected lord. You're amazing. You can indeed say whatever you want," Perfected Lord Tianlan chuckled. Of course, there was no real anger in his eyes when he looked at Lu Chen. Instead, there was a hint of admiration and gratification. "Kid, work hard. I have high hopes for you." Lu Chen rolled his eyes and couldn't help but shudder. "What do you mean by that? Do you feel like you've encountered something and you want to make arrangements for your funeral? That's scary." Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed out loud with an extremely carefree expression. He then said proudly, "Who in the world can go against me?" Lu Chen also laughed and looked at the damn baldy with a strange gaze. After a while, he sighed and said, "I say, I've been drinking all day today. Why do I feel like you're a little drunk? I'm happy that I have a great future ahead of me." Supreme Tianlan said, "But now, it seems like you're the only one I can chat with in the world. It's the right decision to take you in as my disciple. We've barely seen each other in the past 10 years. Now, we can often have a chance to chat alone like this. It's not bad." Lu Chen was slightly surprised. He looked at Supreme Tianlan as if he didn't expect such a high and mighty figure to say something like that to him. However, were those words from the bottom of his heart? Should he believe it? Lu Chen didn't know. He only saw that the person in front of him was living a happy life and had an intimidating aura. He was at the peak of a person's life, and even Lu Chen couldn't help but feel respect for him. If there were no gods in the world, then Supreme Tianlan should be the person closest to a demigod right now, right? If there were gods in the world, such as those worshipped by the devil sects, then this damn baldy would probably be the person who had the highest chance of defeating them? It was probably no wonder that he was so arrogant given how talented and powerful he was and how he looked down on the world. As he was thinking, he suddenly heard Supreme Tianlan ask him again, "By the way, I heard that you've been drinking more and more recently. Is there something wrong with you?" Lu Chen was stunned and suddenly frowned. "How did you know about that? Could it be that old Ma told you?" Chapter 506. Perfected Lord Tianlan shook his head and said, "You're just like a drunkard. Everyone can see how you're drinking when you're free. Why do you need him to tell me?" Lu Chen heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Don't worry, it's just that I've been fond of drinking recently. It won't cause any trouble and it won't harm my body. Of course, I won't become addicted to alcohol. In all these years, there haven't been any cultivators who ruined their cultivation because of alcohol, right?" Perfected Lord Tianlan stared at him for a moment and said, "That's true. However, things like alcohol and women are ultimately not beneficial to cultivation. Excessive drinking is also harmful. Even if others see it and talk about it behind your back, it's not appropriate for you. You should drink less." Lu Chen snorted and said, "Just now, you were acting like you didn't care about anything in the world. Why is it that when it comes to me, you suddenly have to care about how other people look at you?" Perfected Lord Tianlan said indifferently, "You're not a soul formation perfected lord, so you don't have to think about these things." Lu Chen was speechless. After a while, he waved his hand and said, "Fine, fine, fine. You're good. I think there's a saying that's very suitable for the current situation. Do you know what it is?" Old Ma asked Lu Chen with a smile. It seemed like another day had passed. It was dusk. They were walking on the mountainside of Sky Dragon Mountain. The sun was setting and the sky was filled with the afterglow. It looked very beautiful. "Catch a turtle in a jar?" Lu Chen said without turning his head. Old Ma was stunned for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "That's exactly what I mean. You're smart." Lu Chen shrugged and said, "But we still haven't caught that old turtle." Old Ma smiled optimistically and said, "That's fine. I didn't have much hope for it at first. However, ever since I heard that Elder Ghost refused to leave Immortal City, it's only a matter of time." Lu Chen nodded and did not object. In the past, they couldn't do anything to these evil sect spies and ghost elders who were hiding in the Immortal City. That was because they were hiding too deep and their whereabouts were unpredictable. Even the experienced Fuyunji couldn't catch them. But now, firstly, there was Chen He, the traitor who almost knew countless of the evil sect's secrets, and secondly, they knew that Elder Ghost could not leave the Immortal City for some unknown reason, so the situation was completely different. He did not even urge Chen He, because the current situation was that Fuyunji was gradually tightening the encirclement, pulling out the evil faction's hidden nails one by one, and Elder Ghost, this old tortoise's hiding place and leeway, would eventually become smaller and smaller, until there was no way to escape. For thousands of years, this was probably the most embarrassing and most critical moment for the evil cult. Life and death, there was only a thin line. Old Ma glanced at Lu Chen from the side. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Not long ago, this man seemed to have secretly discussed with him whether to secretly leave this immortal city and then wander the world to live a carefree life. Alright, that was a nice way to put it. It was more likely to be to drag out an ignoble existence. But now, the situation was completely different. He'd ascended to the heavens in a single step, and shockingly, he'd become a powerful and influential figure in the true Immortal Alliance. Everyone raised their eyebrows, and his name shook the world in a single day. His future was bright, and the changes in his circumstances were so great that it truly caused others to feel as if they were dreaming. Looking at his current high-spirited look, who could still think of the loneliness when he was frustrated in the past? Feeling good, right? Old Ma couldn't help but still asked Lu Qin. Lu Qin, on the other hand, didn't understand and said, "What?" Old Ma asked, "Becoming the true monarch's successor, now holding great power, is this life comfortable? Is your mood good?" Lu Qin laughed and said, "It's okay, a little better than a few days ago." "Nonsense." Old Ma scolded with a smile, but in his heart, he was also happy for him. It was just that in addition to the joy, there was also a faint sense of loss in the depths of his heart. For so many years, Lu Qin had practically always been together with him. They had gone through tough times, seen blades and swords, and walked through the gates of hell. But in the end, the fate of the two of them was as different as heaven and earth. Why was this? Were people always different from each other? But where was the source of this unfairness? He thought indifferently, then said goodbye to Lu Qin, turned around and left. Lu Qin's identity and status were now different from before, that incomparably noble Kunlun Palace. Except for the supreme true monarch Tianlong, he now had the qualifications to live in that incomparably noble Kunlun Palace. But old Ma didn't have that qualification. He was just a person who had lurked in the Jianghu for many years, accompanying by Lu Qin's side as a messenger. So in the end he could only live outside. For so many years, if Lu Qin was the shadow, then what was old Ma? Old Ma thought, "I'm probably the shadow of the shadow? More indifferent than the shadow, and less sense of existence than the shadow." The shadow might have the opportunity to leave a black shadow on a sunny day, but from beginning to end he was only silent. For a person like him, even if he was killed in a legend, it would only be a few strokes of the brush, like a ripple on the surface of the water. There would be almost no movement, not to mention the stormy waves that would be set off by those big shots. Silent in life and silent in death. Is this the life you want? Is this the destiny you are destined to live? Old Ma stopped in his tracks and glanced back. The tall mountain peak was like a giant, silently looking down at him, perhaps with a bit of contempt. Under the afterglow of the setting sun, the majestic shadow shrouded everything and gradually disappeared into the darkness. Old Ma thought silently for a long time, finally sighed softly, turned around and walked into the gradually falling night. Is there anyone in this world at this time who will still be dead set on following the devil sect, or even join the devil sect? Almost at the same time, in that room on Tianlong Mountain, White Lotus sat on the bed and asked Su Qingjun this question. Su Qingjun laughed in spite of herself and said, "Of course there won't be, even if there is, it would be a madman or a fool." White Lotus shrugged her shoulders and did not say anything, but Su Qingjun suddenly made a sound of surprise and looked up and down at this young girl. White Lotus felt a little strange being looked at by her, said, "Everything is fine, why are you suddenly looking at me like this?" Su Qingjun smiled and said, "Probably because you have been with Lu Qin for a long time, I feel that some of your actions are very similar to him." White Lotus was startled for a moment, then sneered and said, "Nonsense, how can I be like him?" Su Qingjun also felt that it was not possible, laughed, walked to White Lotus and sat down, stretched out her hand and gently stroked her soft hair. This action was intimate and gentle. White Lotus did not have any intention to resist or avoid. It seemed that during this period of time, the relationship between these two girls had become very close. After a while, Su Qingjun softly asked, "Your injury is considered to be almost healed. Why are you still not willing to let me tell Lu Qin?" White Lotus suddenly felt nervous, looked at her and said, "Don't tell me you have already told him?" Su Qingjun shook her head and said, "Not yet, you little girl. 2 days ago you even threatened me, saying that if I say that your injury is healed, you will immediately stab yourself a few more times and make your injury worse. You have already said such words, how can I dare to say it? White Lotus forced a smile, looking a little embarrassed, then sighed and said, I really have something difficult to say, can you help me hide it for a few more days? Su Qingjun nodded, then immediately frowned and said, what are you afraid of? Don't tell me Lu Chen is really behind my back, threatening you in any way, or… White Lotus immediately shook her head and said, oh, that is not the… Suddenly, White Lotus's words were abruptly cut off. The pair of eyes that had been calm and clean for a long time lit up a bit. She looked at Su Qingjun's beautiful face, suddenly revealing a trace of a strange smile. Su Qingjun was surprised and said, what's wrong? White Lotus was silent for a moment, then slightly smiled and said softly, if I say, Lu Chen really has bad intentions towards me, and even has the guts to do it, would you believe me? What? Su Qingjun lost her voice, her complexion changed, and suddenly stood up. Chapter 507. The room fell into silence. Su Qingjun looked at White Lotus with a shocked expression. White Lotus looked at her with a smile at first, but then she felt that this expression was not quite right. Her face immediately darkened, revealing a bit of solemnity. After a while, she seemed to feel that she should be a little more sad, and her eyes became a little red. Then she sighed, seemingly helpless and sad. Looking at Su Qingjun, she blinked her clear eyes. The atmosphere seemed to be a little awkward. Su Qingjun stared at White Lotus for a while, suddenly opened her mouth and said, is what you said true? White Lotus asked in reply, why, you don't believe me? Su Qingjun hesitated for a while, then nodded and said, I really don't dare to believe it. I don't think Lu Chen is this kind of person. White Lotus sneered and said, it sounds like you know him very well. Then tell me, what kind of person is he? Why don't you believe that he would do such a thing? Su Qingjun frowned and looked at White Lotus. After a moment of silence, she said, I feel that your expression is also strange. According to what you said before, if Lu Chen really did harm your body, shouldn't you look sad and in pain now? Why do you still look as if nothing happened? White Lotus paused for a moment, then sighed softly. Her face revealed a somewhat bitter smile. She used her hand to lightly press on her heart and said to Su Qingjun, how can I casually say these things to my face? Even if I do, I will hide it in my heart. It's only you who have such a good relationship with me these days. You can be considered as the first friend that I can confide in. That's why I can't help but tell you. Su Qingjun ignored her explanation. She just frowned and said, but you don't look sad. Even after you were injured these days, you look good and in a good mood. White Lotus slightly lowered her eyes, then gritted her teeth as if she had made up her mind and said, since it has come to this, I will tell you directly. Su Qingjun was startled and said, is there anything else you haven't told me? I actually like him in my heart. White Lotus clenched her fist and said loudly as if she was announcing to the whole world. Of course, in front of her, there was only Su Qingjun in front of her. Su Qingjun was obviously shocked again. It seemed that she suddenly completely did not recognize the girl in front of her. She stammered and said, what did you say? But, just now, didn't you complain to me that Lu Chen did bad things to you? White Lotus snorted and her elegant and pure face revealed a bit of sadness. She said, yes, that's the truth. But I quickly discovered that I actually really like him. Even if he did such a thing to me that was worse than a beast, I still like him. So, I am willing to be with him. She glanced at Su Qingjun and said with a more and more certain tone, yes, you know, when we didn't go up the mountain for a period of time, we lived together in the White Tiger District's Shima Bridge at the foot of the mountain. It was probably the first time that Su Qingjun had seen such a girl in her life. After hearing such words, the astonished expression on her face had not calmed even now. Perhaps, the experience and etiquette that she had learned since she was young had been shattered by the girl in front of her in this instant. But, Su Qingjun was after all not that kind of simple-minded woman with big breasts and no brains. After a while, her expression gradually calmed down. It seemed that she had already sensed something. She looked at White Lotus with even more suspicion and said, "That's not right. What you've said, I still feel that there are many parts that are unreliable." White Lotus looked at her with interest and said, "From what you've said, I think that in your heart, you probably believe in Lu Chen a bit more than you believe in me?" Her smile suddenly flashed with a trace of hidden malice. She said softly, "Don't forget back then, what did he do to you and to your family? He is not a good person." White Lotus continued to speak in a resolute tone to Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun was silent. After a while, she opened her mouth and said calmly, "You're right. Lu Chen shouldn't be counted as the kind of good person that we're talking about. But I still feel that he wouldn't do such a thing." White Lotus sneered and said, "You don't need to speak up for him. That person, Lu Chen, in the past, mingled in the outside world that you and I don't know. To put it bluntly, there are many things that you don't know about him. You don't understand him at all. When he went on a killing spree, could you have thought of it?" As she said that, she emphasized again, "And as I said, although he used force in the beginning, I later liked him willingly, so I got together with him." Su Qingjun just shook her head. Her eyes became clear and firm. She said lightly, "No, you're just a child. He can't possibly like you." White Lotus looked at Su Qingjun's expression and felt uncomfortable in her heart. She felt like her teeth were itching. After hearing this, White Lotus suddenly froze. After a while, she suddenly jumped up, like a kitten whose tail had been stepped on. She suddenly fell into a state of rage. She shouted angrily, "Nonsense, on what basis do you say that he won't like me?" Su Qingjun was also startled by White Lotus's sudden violent and shrill shout. She was stunned for a moment, then she frowned and said, "Don't shout randomly. Speak properly. Although Lu Chen has all kinds of shortcomings, I believe that he has enough self-control. Even in the face of a soul-stirring beauty." Halfway through her words, Su Qingjun suddenly stopped. She didn't know why, but her cheeks blushed for no reason. She seemed to have thought of something, but she quickly returned to normal. However, there was still a hint of hidden bitterness in her expression. She sighed softly and said, "He won't have bad intentions towards a little girl like you. Why do you have to slander his reputation?" White Lotus slapped the table and stood up. She seemed to be very angry and said, "What do you mean by this? Are you saying that I'm not good enough and not qualified to seduce him?" Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment. She suddenly became speechless. After a moment, she said with a bitter smile, "I say, on this matter, aren't we getting further and further away from each other? Where are we going?" White Lotus was still unconvinced. She nimbly jumped off the bed and stood in front of Su Qingjun. She raised her head and puffed out her chest. She sternly said, "No way. I must make this matter clear to you. Look at my face." As she spoke, she used her finger to point at her cheeks, and then she touched her body and said, "Look at my figure again. This chest, this waist, these legs, this figure, aren't they better than 90% of the women in the world? What right do you have to say that I'm not good enough?" Su Qingjun looked at her for a long time. She suddenly laughed. Her expression became gentle. She stretched out her hand and gently hugged White Lotus. White Lotus struggled for a moment. She seemed to be unwilling. But in the end, she didn't leave. Su Qingjun said with some emotion, "Listen to me. You're at your best now. Your future is bound to be limitless. Why do you have to pour dirty water on yourself? This world is a lot more difficult than we think." If these words were accidentally spread, Lu Chen would naturally be a bit embarrassed, but he wouldn't necessarily lose all of his power. In fact, there might even be some people who would envy him. On the contrary, it's only us women. Those disgusting and vicious words will entangle you and follow you for a lifetime. "There's no need," Su Qingjun said softly. "Even if you hate Lu Chen, there's no need to do this." White Lotus was silent. She seemed to be moved by Su Qingjun's kind and gentle words. Perhaps, this was the first time in many years that she felt a strange warmth. After a while, she said, "Well, to be honest, those words just now were not true." Su Qingjun breathed a sigh of relief and smiled sweetly. White Lotus said again, "I don't hate Lu Chen. But I want to tell you one thing. This person must have a lot of secrets. You might be able to guess that he didn't fool around with me, but what about before? How did he spend the past 10 years? Did he sleep with other women? Or did he sleep with more than one woman? Did he sleep with 5, 10, or even more women? As she spoke, her face gradually looked cold. Even her voice became a little cold. You're good to me, so I'll tell you the truth, even if these words are not pleasant to hear. Before you believe him, before you like him, think about these things first. With that, White Lotus lightly pushed Su Qingjun's hand away and turned to walk to the side. Su Qingjun was stunned at this moment. She stood there in a daze. Her face gradually became a little pale. Chapter 508. The affairs of the world were like a big dream. How many times did life experience the coolness of autumn? Unknowingly, the immortal city had once again arrived at the chilly autumn with falling leaves. Although during this period of time, Zhengxianmeng and Fuyunji's men were busy pursuing and intercepting the evil sect's forces in the immortal city to completely eliminate this malignant tumor from the immortal city, but for the vast majority of the immortal city residents, these things did not affect their lives, and there were even many people who knew nothing about it. People lived in their own world. As long as it was peaceful within their sight, they would think that everyone and the whole world was safe and sound. Therefore, most of us could live happily and with a clear conscience, simply and quietly. Until something woke up the beautiful dream. That day, the weather was a little gloomy. The autumn wind that blew from the Four River Plain seemed a little harsh and chilly. Dark clouds gathered in the sky, but there was no sign of rain. In short, it was a gloomy day that looked no different from usual. Countless people in the immortal city were living their lives as usual. Everyone did what they were supposed to do. It was bustling and bustling as usual. Mount Sky Dragon stood tall and majestic. The huge statues of the 4 great divine beasts were still staring at this ancient and huge city as usual. Until a strange phenomenon appeared in the sky. As if there was no warning at all, in the sky above the immortal city, in the gloomy sky, suddenly, a strong red light suddenly appeared, and then from east to west, it stretched across the sky, like a boundary line that divided the sky into 2 halves. Immediately after, dark red light shot out from that red light, covering the sky, but strangely, these light only spread towards one side of the red line, and the other half of the sky was completely unaffected. It was still that gloomy look. Not long after, the sky became half gloomy and half blood red. This was, of course, an unusually rare strange phenomenon, and it happened right above the immortal city. Countless people in the huge city only needed to raise their heads, and they could easily see this scene. The blood-red light flickered and was reflected in the countless eyes that looked up. It was like a burning sea of blood. That strange aura made people subconsciously hold their breath, as if something terrible was about to happen. For that moment, inside and outside Immortal City, below and below Celestial Dragon Mountain, everyone fell into silence. Countless people looked at the sky above their heads, which seemed to have been torn in half. They were dumbfounded and didn't know what to do. However, this phenomenon did not last for too long. In less than 15 minutes, the red light in the sky dimmed. Soon, all the light scattered, until the red line that split the sky also disappeared. The sky returned to that gloomy and lifeless day, as if nothing had happened. However, inside and outside the Immortal City, countless discussions and whispers rang out in every corner of the Immortal City. On Mount Tianlong, in front of the Kunlun Temple, Perfected Lord Tianlan and Lu Chen stood side by side at the entrance of the temple. Almost at the same time when the phenomenon appeared in the sky, Perfected Lord Tianlan, who was talking to Lu Chen in the temple, sensed something and walked out to look at the sky. Together with Lu Chen, he basically saw this rare and strange phenomenon in the sky from the beginning to the end. When the rainbow light in the sky completely dissipated and everything seemed to return to normal, the master and disciple in front of the Kunlun Temple did not speak for a while. Lu Chen glanced at Perfected Lord Tianlan. From the side, He suddenly realized that the usually calm perfected Lord Tianlan actually had some inexplicable emotions on his face. It seemed to be happy and sad at the same time, and it was hard to tell which was rare. Perhaps sensing Lu Chen's gaze, perfected Lord Tianlan turned around and exchanged glances with Lu Chen. His expression returned to normal, but he smiled and said, "Have you seen this phenomenon before?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "I've never seen him before." Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "Yes, it is indeed a rare phenomenon. But judging from your expression just now, you seem to have an opinion?" Lu Chen hesitated for a moment and then said honestly, "Yes, I think it's a little strange because the red light in the sky just now is somewhat similar to the blood moon in the underground maze of the devil cult. But it's hard to say. After all, the entire underground cave is covered by the blood moon, but the sky is divided into two halves. It looks very strange." Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him again and then nodded. "You have a good eye. It is indeed similar to the blood moon in the underground palace of the devil cult. There should be some relationship that we don't know yet." Lu Chen was stunned for a moment, but at that moment, he heard something different in perfected Lord Tianlan's words. So after a moment of hesitation, he still asked tentatively, "You just said the underground palace of the devil cult? And not the maze of the devil cult?" "The underground palace of the devil cult," perfected Lord Tianlan said lightly. As for what exactly the devil cult was, why was the huge underground palace built, and what great secret was there, perfected Lord Tianlan did not explain in detail to Lu Chen. He just asked Lu Chen lightly, "How's the matter at the devil cult? Have you found Elder Grey's hiding place?" Lu Chen said, "All the hidden spies have basically been removed by us. The devil cult's years of hard work here are almost all gone. We haven't found Elder Grey's whereabouts yet, but after a thorough search, there are not many places where he can hide. At most 2 months, we will be able to catch this old tortoise." Perfected Lord Tianlan first smiled and nodded, saying, "Well done. That old tortoise is cunning and indeed troublesome." As he spoke, he pondered for a moment, then kept his smile and said to Lu Chen seriously, "But the situation is different recently. I can probably give you a month's time at most. Bring that person called Chen He with you. The Fuyunji troops will be jointly commanded by you and Xue Ying. Do your best to catch this fiend." The corner of Lu Chen's mouth twitched, but he cleverly did not ask whether it was him or Xue Ying who was in charge of this matter. He only agreed. Then, he looked at perfected Lord Tianlan and said, "Looks like this red light phenomenon is very important to you?" Perfected Lord Tianlan waved his hand and said, "I'll tell you later." With that, he smiled and walked into the hall with his hands behind his back. Lu Chen looked at his back and suddenly shouted, "Do you want to live or die?" Perfected Lord Tianlan did not even stop walking. Along the way, he only waved his hand casually and said, "Either is fine." With that, Lu Chen did not ask any more. From a certain point of view, perfected Lord Tianlan's words gave him a lot of power. But when he turned back to look at the calm sky again, an inexplicable anxiety slowly appeared on his face. He raised his head and looked at the sky in a daze, but no matter how he looked, he could not see anything unusual, let alone the mysterious blood moon underground that he was thinking about. A great show seemed to be slowly unfolding. This was a sudden feeling in Lu Chen's heart. Chapter 509. At a certain time during the day, the originally quiet Celestial Dragon Mountain, or more precisely, this area of Fuyunji's territory, suddenly erupted into a commotion. Orders were sent out from the Floating Clouds Division's main hall. They were quickly sent out in all directions by the nimble people. Then, in a short period of time, more people began to gather from different places, like a stone smashing into the water and creating ripples. At this moment, there were already many people in the main hall. Most of them stood quietly and solemnly at the side. At the center of the symbol of power, Xue Ying and Lu Chen stood side by side. Some distance away from them, Old Ma and Chen He also stood there waiting for orders. Different from the people around them who faintly revealed a bit of killing intent, Xue Ying and Lu Chen's faces looked relatively calm, as if they did not feel that what was about to happen was some earth-shattering event. At least, they looked much calmer than the others. Shui Ying's gaze swept across the main hall, intentionally or unintentionally looking at Xianxia's face. Then, without turning her head, she only lowered her voice and said in a voice that only Lu Chen beside her could hear, "Look, that Xianxia seems a little excited." Lu Chen glanced over there, his expression also unchanging. He said, "There's nothing strange about it. When he first came to our side, his biggest capital was to think that he could help us capture Elder Gui. In the end, after so long, the evil cult has caught many spies, but the biggest one has never been seen. It's only right that he is a little anxious." Shui Ying suddenly smiled and said, "Right now, the person who wants Elder Gui dead the most is probably him. Maybe right now, his mood is even more anxious than our Fiyunji." Lu Chen's gaze swept over there, and as expected, he saw Xianxia standing there. Although at first, there did not seem to be anything wrong, after careful observation, one could see that he seemed to subconsciously clench his fists. His gaze was sharp, and he occasionally glanced outside the main hall, as if he was very anxious, hoping that the people gathered here would arrive as soon as possible so that they could do that important thing. Lu Chen retracted his gaze, shook his head slightly, and said nothing more. However, both Lu Chen and Shui Ying's attention had been placed on Xianxia earlier. Hence, they could tell that there was something strange about Xianxia's expression. However, the two of them did not notice that the person standing beside Xianxia had also turned his head around at this moment. Although his expression was the same, his eyes were a little strange as he looked at the two of them, who represented status and power in the crowd. Because they were too familiar with each other, people would always subconsciously ignore the people around them, always thinking that they would be the same as before and nothing would change. Perhaps it was because of the many experiences they had in the past, and perhaps it was because of the trust that came from the bottom of their hearts that they would not think too much. It is as if we always think that our friend will always be there for us, as if it is only natural that he or she should be there for all eternity. Even the greatest and most meticulous person would often be like this. Lu Chen's gaze shifted away. He saw that more and more people were entering the Great Hall. Other than Fiyunji's troops, the group of experts dispatched from the Kunlun party had also been called over. He quickly saw Su Qingjun in the crowd. Coincidentally, that woman was also looking in his direction. Lu Chen revealed a trace of a smile, nodded at Su Qingjun and smiled. Unexpectedly, not only did Su Qingjun not smile back, she looked at him with a complicated expression. Her expression was cold, and after a moment, she turned her head away without any reaction, as if she did not see him. Lu Chen was startled. He thought, is she angry? But I did not provoke her recently, or is it because something happened to Su Qingjun before, and she is unhappy? Seeing that almost everyone had arrived, Shui Ying glanced at Lu Chen, a trace of inquiry in her eyes. Lu Chen smiled, took half a step back, and at the same time made a modest gesture. Shui Ying smiled slightly, and did not decline again. She took a step forward. This time, she immediately attracted the attention of everyone in the Great Hall. The few whispers that were originally there immediately quieted down. Today, we are going to do something big, Shui Ying said straightforwardly. Under the continuous pressure of Fiyunji and Xianxia, in the process of almost non-stop sweeping and exterminating the hidden spies of the evil cult, the people who stood in the light and absolute power could not understand the despair of those who were constantly being pressured, hearing from time to time that their companions around them had died, and having a dark and lifeless future. Despair made people feel pain, it made people crazy, and it also made people have no way out. Even if they once had the most unwavering determination, it was possible for them to collapse at the last moment. This kind of thing happened. Among the last remnants of the evil cult, there were finally people who could not endure it in their hearts, and secretly sought refuge with Fiyunji. Then, like all the traitors in the world, they needed a presentable gift, a proof of allegiance. This proof of allegiance was quickly delivered to Shui Ying and Lu Chen. It was a piece of news. The traitor of the evil cult clearly pointed out that there was a very important, illustrious, but extremely mysterious high-ranking figure of the evil cult, who had been secretly arranged to hide in a secret place in a certain immortal city some time ago. And the reason why this traitor knew was because that place was the meaning of his existence. His mission was to protect this kind of important figure in the evil cult to temporarily take refuge. But now, this guardian of the refuge suddenly came to his senses and felt that he had taken the wrong path in the past and believed in the wrong person and the evil cult. Everything was the fault of the evil cult and that hateful elder ghost. Fuck the divine tree, fuck the myths and legends of unifying the three realms, they were all lies. I want to live. He did not know the identity of this important figure. But what he knew was that only the true important figures of the evil cult were qualified to hide in his place. When Shui Ying's words echoed in the great hall of Fuyunji, everyone became excited. The identity of that deeply hidden important figure seemed to be on the verge of being revealed, and to completely destroy the last vitality of the evil cult, there was probably only one last step left. Shui Ying quickly began to make arrangements, and divided the hundreds of elite troops in the Great Hall into several batches, each with a leader. At the same time, the troops were made up of 10 people, and with an abnormally firm attitude, she explained that the 10 people in each team would supervise the operation together, and if anyone dared to leave the team alone or did anything to report to the outside, they would be immediately arrested and given the right to kill them on the spot. The meaning of this order was naturally clear to everyone. It was nothing more than an estimate that there were still some remnants of the evil cult that had infiltrated into Fuyunji, and in this capture, there was a high possibility that the important figure was Elder Ghost. No matter what, there could not be any accidents. The inescapable net, following the order, was opened. When the troops in the Great Hall filed out and flew down the mountain, Shui Ying and Lu Chen also walked in the same direction. At such an important moment, the two of them naturally had to be present. But as they walked, Lu Chen suddenly realized that Shui Ying's face did not seem to have much excitement, but instead looked a little disappointed. Of course, this was all hidden very well. If he was not standing next to her, he might not have noticed it. Lu Chen was about to open his mouth to ask, but then he thought of something and quickly suppressed this thought. He turned his head back to look at the tall and majestic Floating Clouds Division's main hall. This illustrious and prestigious palace towered high above Celestial Dragon Mountain. Sunlight shone on it, as if at this moment, it had already reached its most glorious and dazzling moment. Chapter 5:10. When going down the mountain, Chen He and the team looked a little nervous, seemed to be both excited and agitated, and also a little anxious. He found Lu Chen, pulled him aside, lowered his voice and asked Lu Chen, "Will Supreme Tianlan come to today's arrest?" Lu Chen frowned, glanced at Chen He. His expression was a little strange. Chen He hurriedly shook his head and said, "Don't misunderstand, I have no other meaning. Since I have already decided to rely on Immortal Alliance, I naturally know what to do. But..." He suddenly stopped, looked left and right, and then approached Lu Chen, said in a low voice, "But today's matter is really important. If that person is really Elder Gui, we must not make a mistake, otherwise, it will be very difficult to find such a good opportunity next time." Lu Chen was silent for a moment, said, "You don't have confidence in Fuyunji's people?" Chen He smiled bitterly and said, "Of course not. Fuyunji has been fighting with the evil cult for so many years, of course I know how powerful they are. But you also know, Elder Ghost is the last remaining master of the evil faction, and for many years he has always been mysterious and unfathomable. Even though I have been his messenger for many years, I have never been able to find out his background. For such a person, his cultivation realm, Dao skills and supernatural powers are almost unpredictable." He paused again, said softly, "But if that Elder Gui has some secret means, or if he has secretly cultivated, his cultivation is extremely high, even reaching the level of deity stage, then it will be troublesome. Even if we can suppress him with so many people, we will either suffer heavy casualties, or risk of him escaping if we are not careful. But if there is Supreme Tianlan in charge, the situation will be completely different." These words were reasonable, and Lu Chen couldn't refute them for a moment. However, he didn't immediately agree or answer Chen He. Instead, after thinking for a moment, he said, "What you said does make some sense. However, my master is an elusive person, and his whereabouts are unfathomable. Although the various arrangements for today's matter were made by the Floating Clouds Agency, It is only natural that he is aware of it. However, I do not know whether he will come later or whether he will observe from the shadows. Chen He was silent, probably understood something, then nodded to Lu Chen and walked forward. Lu Chen looked at his back, frowned slightly after a while, also continued to walk. To carry out such an important arrest, of course it was impossible to swagger through the streets with a large group of people and then arrogantly stroll to other people's door and knock. Even if you were strong and had an absolute advantage, this kind of behavior was not awe-inspiring, but would be called retarded. Before going down the mountain, this group of elite people dispersed silently, like water droplets converging into the vast ocean. In the blink of an eye, no trace could be found. However, under the calm sea, there were countless undercurrents that were closing in on the same target from all directions. Lu Chen and the other large group separated. Walking on the streets of the immortal city, he looked inconspicuous, like an ordinary person. Just as he walked near the long street where the explosion had happened before, a series of footsteps sounded behind him. He turned his head to take a look, and found that it was old Ma rushing over, walked to his side, and walked side by side with him. The two of them often walked in and out together, so they were not afraid of revealing their whereabouts. Lu Chen nodded to greet him, and old Ma also smiled. "Are you nervous? After all, that is the last big head." Oma asked. Lu Chen thought for a moment, but smiled and said, "It's all right. You don't say. I have never thought about this before, but after you mentioned it, I found that I really don't feel excited. Probably because the evil faction is too weak, we don't really care about it anymore." Old Ma was a little emotional, sighed a few times, and said, "How many years has it been? In the early years, I always felt that the evil faction was still a huge monster, the mortal enemy of our good faction. To defeat them was extremely difficult, and we don't know how much blood and lives had to be sacrificed, but in the end, today, it has become like this." Lu Chen lightly said, "Things are always done by people. If they did not do those things in the past, they would not have become like this so quickly." Old Ma was silent for a moment, then smiled and nodded and said, "You are right." The two of them walked through the long street, passing by the place that was blown to pieces, and there was only a big pit, and it was also tightly surrounded by many layers of cloth. Looking at the guards outside, Lu Chen and old Ma both took a few steps to the side and stayed away from that place. "Recently, I have been too busy to come here, and I thought that this place should have been filled up. Why is it still like this?" If it was only for a passage to enter and exit the underground maze, it was indeed only necessary to leave a passage. This long street was bustling, and it was indeed very inconvenient to enclose a piece of land like this for a long time. Standing beside Lu Chen, old Ma glanced over there and then whispered, "I know this. I heard that not only did they not reduce the number of guards, but they also seem to have increased the number of people recently, and the defense seems to be impenetrable. Now, except for the Starry Temple's own people, almost no one from other halls can go to the underground maze." Lu Chen paused for a moment and said thoughtfully, "Speaking of which, it seems that after we left that place, we did not go down again." Old Ma shrugged and said, "Isn't that so? But from what you said, it seems that there is no reason to go down there." Lu Chen smiled and did not answer. Old Ma and him walked a few steps forward, and suddenly coughed and asked Lu Chen, "Oh yes, when I was going down the mountain just now, I saw Chen. He specially ran over to look for you, and whispered to you for a long time. At this time, why did he look for you?" Lu Chen did not think too much and said, "Oh, that's because he was a little worried, and ran over to ask me about the whereabouts of the damn Baldy, and whether he will go over today." Old Ma's expression suddenly changed, and Lu Chen glanced at him and said, "Don't worry, I just brushed it off," and did not say anything. Old Ma shook his head and said, "No, why did this guy suddenly ask about Sir's whereabouts? Could it be that he has other plans?" Lu Chen pondered for a moment and shook his head and said, "This should not be the case. Right now, among our group, the one who wants Elder Ghost dead the most is probably Chen He. But he is worried that the old tortoise's cultivation is too high, and he is afraid that we will let him escape." Old Ma nodded and then said with some disdain, "He thinks too much." Lu Chen also smiled and turned his head. Seeing that they were unknowingly about to cross the long street, he suddenly thought of something, and suddenly raised his head to look at the sky above his head, and then turned back to look at the place that was tightly surrounded by cloth. Suddenly, Lu Chen was startled, and saw that above the ground that was surrounded by the cloth, there was suddenly an inconspicuous auspicious cloud floating over, and then quietly landed, disappearing into the depths of the heavy cloth, and in a blink of an eye, disappeared without a trace. Who was that? Chapter 511. Unlike the scene of many Starry Hall's disciples bustling about in the underground maze a while ago, this huge underground city was still shrouded in a strange blood-red light, but almost no one could be seen as far as the eye could see. The people of Starry Hall who were working here had already evacuated, perhaps because of the omnipresent and elusive strange aura, or because they had already done what they should do. In the huge underground city, many tall buildings stood silently. They were empty, but they seemed to be quietly waiting for their owners to return at some point in time. A tall and burly figure appeared in this huge underground cave and walked into the long street of the underground city. When the light from the blood moon in the sky shone on his head, it would occasionally refract a strange halo. Starry Hall had already sealed this place and did not allow outsiders to enter or leave. Even most of the other halls in Xianxia were the same. However, Perfected Lord Tianlan was an exception. Looking from afar, his wide sleeves fluttered as he walked, making him look like he was walking in a sea of blood. Every step he took seemed to leave a blood-red footprint on the ground. The empty city looked especially cold and murderous. However, as he gradually walked into this city that was bathed in the blood-red light, some strange and distorted runes gradually appeared in his line of sight. These runes were carved on the road, the corner of the wall, the door frame, the stone, and all sorts of corners. They seemed to be unrelated, but in fact, they were indistinctly independent. At a certain moment, after true Lord Tianlan's footsteps crossed an invisible boundary, suddenly, like a stone thrown into calm water, a series of ripples abruptly appeared around his body. The light and shadow in the air suddenly twisted and trembled, as if a wall of water was erected in front of him and swayed. It twisted into a strange mirror image in front of Perfected Lord Tianlan, reflecting his shadow. It was as if another version of him had suddenly appeared in front of him, staring at him coldly. Perfected Lord Tianlan's expression did not change as he looked at his other self indifferently before walking over. His body passed through the figure and continued forward without a sound. The figure actually turned around and looked at his back. Then, it began to tremble and gradually dissipated into the air. The surroundings were silent, as if it had suddenly quietened down. Actually, after the Starry Hall disciples left, there was basically no sound in this underground cave. It was very quiet. However, when one was inside, there would more or less be some sounds, for example, the sound of unknown insects in certain corners, or the sound of wind drifting from the corner of a certain cave entrance. However, after crossing that invisible line, all the sounds in the city suddenly disappeared. It was a true silence that seemed to isolate all sounds outside of that invisible boundary. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked around and nodded slowly. There was a hint of satisfaction on his face. Then, he continued to walk forward until he reached the center of the underground city, next to the huge statue that connected the ground and the dome of the subterranean cavern. Perfected Lord Gu Yu of the Starry Hall was sitting here a few times before. The two of them would chat when they met. However, it was rare that even Perfected Lord Gu Yu was not around this time. It could be considered as truly empty. Perfected Lord Tianlan pondered for a moment. His gaze fell on the spot where Perfected Lord Gu Yu usually meditated. After a while, he walked over and stood there. Everything seemed to be the same. The only difference was that he was a little closer to the statue. After a while, when Perfected Lord Tianlan looked up at the sky, he soon realized that when he looked at the blood moon from this position, he seemed to be able to see a gap in the red light around the blood moon. In that gap, the blood moon seemed to be rotating slowly. In the past, there were no gaps around the blood moon at all. This place was clearly something that had appeared not long ago. Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and did not seem to be too bothered. Then, he walked to the side of the statue and reached out his thick and broad palm to press on it. It was ice cold. The statue did not move. But after a while, something seemed to throb behind the stone. Then, a terrifying aura suddenly rushed out from the depths of the statue. The aura was ferocious, and the numbers seemed to be unbelievably large. It was as if there were tens of thousands of evil spirits imprisoned in this huge statue. Then, at this moment, they suddenly felt the aura of the flesh and blood of a living person, and immediately surged out like raging waves. The statue remained motionless, as if all the movements had nothing to do with it. However, in the depths of the stone, a terrifying roar seemed to come from the depths of the netherworld. Wave after wave endlessly, crazily rushed towards perfected Lord Tianlan. Thud, 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 a strange and deep sound slowly rang out. It was originally extremely soft and almost inaudible to ordinary people. However, in the middle of this extremely quiet underground city, it was exceptionally clear and made one's hair stand on end. However, there was no fear on perfected Lord Tianlan's face. He even looked at the stone surface of the huge statue in front of him with a look of disdain. He slowly raised his hand and gradually left the stone surface. As if sensing that the warm aura of flesh and blood was gradually leaving, the strange voices behind the stone suddenly became agitated. All sorts of strange, mournful, and terrifying roars rose and fell, shouting at the top of their lungs. However, they were imprisoned by the stone and all their desires were destined to turn into nothingness. The hand left the stone surface. Wang! Like a string suddenly hitting a high note, all the noise suddenly disappeared, as if it had never existed in the first place. The statue was still a statue and the stone surface was still a stone. There was no change and no strange things appeared again. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked down indifferently. His gaze landed on the place where the statue was deeply buried in the ground. A pondering expression appeared on his face as he raised his head to look at the blood moon above his head. In the end, he suddenly let out a soft sigh and muttered to himself, "It should be soon. There's only one last step left." Before he finished speaking, perfected Lord Tianlan's body suddenly paused and he raised his eyebrows. He instantly turned around and his eyes were cold and bright. An indescribable aura suddenly surged in all directions like a huge flood. At that moment, even the omnipresent blood-red light seemed to avoid this burly figure. Then, the surroundings became silent. There was no sound at all and no trace of anyone. However, perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes, which were as deep as the night, were rippling as he coldly swept his gaze across the surroundings. After a while, his gaze slowly stopped at a house near the city. As the light floated, it passed through the doors and windows, the courtyard, the empty corridors, the stone paths, the wasteland, and then a deep well that had long dried up. A dark shadow was hiding in the depths of the well. There was no warmth or aura from its body. It was like a natural stone that silently stayed in the darkness. Everything happened just now. When the terrifying and strange aura from the statue appeared and disappeared in an instant, his heart beat slightly faster. In the distance, perfected Lord Tianlan stared at the house and frowned. Chapter 5:12. Perfected Lord Tianlan did not deliberately lighten his footsteps, nor did he look nervous or cautious as if he was facing a great enemy. He merely walked towards the house as if he had sensed something. He walked calmly, naturally, calmly and confidently, as if he was completely fearless, as if there was nothing in this world that was worthy of his scruples, even if he was in this desolate underground labyrinth, even if the scene of thousands of ghosts roaring had just happened not long ago. He looked as if he did not believe in heaven and earth, did not respect ghosts and gods, and despised fate. He only cared about himself and believed in his own strength. That was why he didn't even bother to lighten his footsteps or disguise himself. He just walked straight into the empty mansion with a wave of his wide robe sleeves. The house that was shrouded by the red light of the blood moon had a strange color. At first glance, it even looked as if the walls and house were slowly oozing blood. If a timid person were to come here, he would probably be scared to death. However, To perfected Lord Tianlan, these were, of course, meaningless illusions. There was not even the slightest ripple in his eyes as he calmly swept his gaze across the surroundings and observed the house. Under the red light, it was as silent as the outside. There was no sound at all. The extremely faint movement that had suddenly appeared at a certain moment earlier had naturally disappeared without a trace. In retrospect, that extremely faint movement that could not even be considered a sound was more likely just a momentary trance or a momentary illusion. Perfected Lord Tianlan frowned as he stood at the entrance of the house, quietly looking at every corner of the house, as if he was lost in thought. At the same time, in the deserted backyard of the house, at the bottom of the dry well, where darkness shrouded, that black figure seemed to have completely turned into a lifeless stone, sitting motionlessly against the wall. There was no warmth, no breath, and no heartbeat. He did not even look like a dead person, but rather a stone that was as good as new. Perfected Lord Tianlan stood at the entrance for a long time, but still did not take any further action. It seemed that he was not sure what had happened just now, or perhaps he had only suddenly sensed a slight movement in the direction of the house, but after he came over, all the movements had disappeared. So, was it an illusion or did it really exist? Perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes shone brightly as he continued to scan the mansion. The invisible yet fearsome aura emanating from his body seemed to seep into every corner of the mansion. A moment later, he suddenly strode forward and walked into the house. In the dark well, the black shadow that had almost completely fallen into a deathly stillness raised its head slightly in the darkness. There seemed to be a strange light flickering in the darkness. He looked a little nervous. Peng ping. The footsteps were neither fast nor hurried as they steadily and forcefully stepped on the ground. Although there wasn't any great commotion, the figure in the darkness could clearly feel that some of the creatures living in the darkness in the depths of the soil beneath him, the little bugs and monsters that were far away from the surface and had never seen light their entire lives, were all fleeing in all directions, desperately trying to leave this place. A gust of wind suddenly blew past this place. There was almost no wind here. The figure in the darkness seemed to sense something and slowly raised his head. He looked up and vaguely saw a tall and burly figure suddenly appear near the mouth of the well. The light of the blood moon shone down from above, casting a black shadow on perfected Lord Tianlan's broad body and shrouding the mouth of the well. Perfected Lord Tianlan stopped in his tracks. This was the first time he had stopped walking from the front hall to the backyard. It was a desolate scene around him. Apart from himself, there seemed to be no other signs of life. There was nothing out of the ordinary. Everything seemed to be silent, empty, and lifeless. After a moment, perfected Lord Tianlan's gaze swept across all the corners of the place. Then, he frowned slightly and his gaze landed on the last corner, that dry well. The large group of people from Fuyunji split up and snuck into the ocean-like immortal city. Then, 2 hours later, they quietly gathered from all directions and appeared outside a large mansion in the Vermilion Bird district of the immortal city. Without a sound, they dispersed all the irrelevant people in the surroundings and suppressed all the abnormal noises and noises. It was said that in the past, there was a lame joke in the immortal city. It was said that the name of Xianxia Fuyunji could stop children from crying at night. This was used to make fun of the devil sect demons in the immortal city for hiding like children. However, based on today's performance, even if the name of Fuyunji didn't make everyone fearful, it at least made most people revere them. Almost everyone cooperated and left. Thus, in silence, the people from Fuyunji surrounded this place. On the long street outside the mansion, Lu Chen and Old Ma stood side by side. Old Ma looked at the mansion that occupied a large area and sighed. These devil sect bastards seemed to be quite rich. Then, he said to Lu Chen in a low voice, "I say, do you think the big guy hiding in this house today, could it be that old turtle?" Lu Chen pondered for a moment, nodded and said, "I think there is at least a 70% chance that it is him. Some time ago, we wiped out many of the devil sect's spies and informants. Almost all of their nests were wiped out by us. No matter how cunning and treacherous Elder Ghost is, the places he can hide in will definitely become less and less." Other than that, in the Devil sect today, especially in the Immortal City, other than Elder Ghost, I really can't think of anyone else who can be considered as a big shot in the sect. Old Ma made a sound of acknowledgement and seemed to agree with Lu Chen's words. His face also revealed a look of anticipation. He clenched his fist and waved it and said, "After getting rid of that old turtle, I want to see how those Devil sect bastards can still stir up trouble. They will probably perish here." Lu Chen smiled and said, "I hope so." As he spoke, he glanced at the house. In the depths of his eyes, a trace of complicated emotion flashed past. Even though it was a blood feud, even though they were irreconcilable enemies, even though the Devil sect was so weak and Lu Chen had contributed a lot, not to mention that everyone wanted to kill each other as soon as possible, but Lu Chen had after all lived in the Devil sect for many years. Seeing this sect that had been passed down for 1,000 years was about to reach its end, he also felt an inexplicable emotion in his heart. The once flourishing, the heroes and heroism, all like the morning dew in a dream, disappeared in the past history, never to return. In front of them, there was a tall and charming figure. That was Shuang. After arranging everything, Shuang also seemed to feel that she had vaguely ushered in the highest peak of her life. That sense of accomplishment and satisfaction made her face exude an astonishing beauty. She raised her hand and waved heavily towards the house. Instantly, countless figures charged in from all directions while furious roars and shocked cries resounded. After a short moment, miserable and shrill cries pierced through the tranquility of the city, and they reverberated throughout the bright world, causing the clear sky to be covered in a layer of blood-red shadows. You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.